Chapter 174. Then about 100 meters to the northwest, I'll see a huge green rock with an old tree growing on it. I buried the last 4 corpses here. In the study, Fang Xinjian slowly told everyone how many Garcia's great warriors' corpses he had buried, as well as the approximate locations of the 14 corpses. Ferdinand said agitatedly, 14 Garcia's great warriors' corpses? We're rich. Xinjian, are you sure you didn't remember wrongly? Fang Xinjian said, after I reached level 3 in my mental cultivation method, I rarely forget things. There might be some mistakes in some of the details, but the general direction should be correct. Great, haha, 14 Garcia's great warriors' corpses. Moreover, the war has just ended. If I'm given some time to promote them, I'll definitely be able to sell them for more than 15,000 gold. Saying this, he then looked at Fang Xinjian and asked, Oh, right. How do you plan on getting them? Fang Xinjian shook his head. Don't promote them. Do it as soon as possible. I want to participate in that auction. Ferdinand was stunned for a moment, but he instantly understood that Fang Xinjian wanted to participate in the auction to borrow the parietal bones of a conferred knight. He smiled bitterly. You still haven't given up? Even if you manage to sell it for 15,000 gold, no one can say for sure how much money you'll need to spend to win this auction. Fang Xinjian did not waver and said firmly, I must do it. He looked at the 3 of them and continued, after this is done, I'll give each of you 100 gold. But I'll need the 3 of you to help me search for the 14 corpses. He needed to stay in the academy and continue running the classes. Moreover, searching for corpses in the forest would waste too much time, and it would also affect his cultivation. Hearing Fang Xinjian's words, Anthony waved his hand and said, Don't worry, Xinjian. Since you've given us instructions, we'll definitely make the proper arrangements for you. As for the 100 gold, you don't have to ask for it. Fang Xinjian shook his head. That's a different matter. Since I've asked you guys to do something, I'll naturally have to pay you. Anthony refused for a while, but in the end, he agreed to take the money. On the other side, Robert's eyes immediately lit up when he heard 100 gold coins. He was someone who had been a dojo owner before. Unlike an unaffiliated person like Anthony, he deeply understood the value of money. To him, 100 gold coins was already a huge sum of money. It was enough to greatly improve his life. He patted his chest, letting out banging sounds as he said, Don't worry, Xinjian. I'll definitely send them to you safely. Ferdinand saw Fang Xinjian turn his head. Although Fang Xinjian's eyes were closed, he was also watching Ferdinand's movements. He shrugged helplessly. You want me to go too? Fang Xinjian said, with 3 knights we should be relatively safe. Ferdinand said unwillingly, I still have to busy myself with the matters of the classes. Just let the 2 of them wear their knight attire. Who would dare to attack knights within the Empire's borders? Digging up corpses in the forest was definitely a dirty and tiring job. Of course, he didn't want to go at all. However, he was still very interested in having the items brought over for him to resell. Seeing how Fang Xinjian did not move at all and continued to stare at him with his eyes closed, Ferdinand felt as if Fang Xinjian was not blind at all. Damn, you can't be pretending to be blind, right? Seeing how Fang Xinjian was still staring at him, Ferdinand waved his hand. All right. I'll go. Fang Xinjian nodded in satisfaction. Then I'll have to trouble you guys. However, we're in a rush. Please set off now. Seeing how anxious Fang Xinjian was, both Anthony and Robert revealed surprised expressions. However, Ferdinand nodded in understanding. All right. We'll set off now. Fang Xinjian reminded him once again, You must rush back before the auction starts and sell off all 14 sets of human remains. Ferdinand smiled confidently. I'll handle it. Don't worry. Fang Xinjian nodded and said, Oh, right. I still have a piece of property in the suburbs. Help me sell it as well. That piece of property was something that Fang Xinjian had won through a bet with Huang Lin during the first interclass competition. However, he had never visited it even once. Now that he was in need of money, he decided to sell it as well. Ferdinand left with Anthony and Robert, while Fang Xinjian stayed behind to take charge of the class, continuing to tutor the students. 3 days passed by, and the rate at which Fang Xinjian's class was gaining members had completely slowed down. Over the past 3 days, only 2 people had joined. Meanwhile, his maximum level of sword techniques had achieved a breakthrough, reaching 89 set. He was one step closer to leveling up his unparalleled sword intent. Just as he thought that everything would pass peacefully, an instructor came to the class, saying that the vice-headmaster had asked him to make a trip over. Although Fang Xinjian found it strange, he still followed the instructor. Following a small path, he came to a huge training ground. Right now there were Hamel, Ralph, and Rhoda, 2 males and 1 female, standing there. Other than Fang Xinjian, the 3 of them could be said to be the strongest with the greatest potential in the academy. Edmund stood before the 3 of them. When he saw that Fang Xinjian had arrived, he waved his hand, wearing a benevolent expression. He did not seem to harbor any ill intentions towards Fang Xinjian. Seeing Fang Xinjian walk up to him, Edmund said, "Xinjian, I'll have to trouble you with something this time around." He looked at the 3 of them and said, "The regional selection this time around is of great importance. For the benefit of all the knights in the academy, we need someone to be able to get into the top 10 in the regional selection. For this goal, I've set up this elite class and chosen the 3 strongest and most talented students in the academy. They are Hamel, Ralph, and Rhoda. From now on, the academy will provide you with a large amount of resources to help you make the final push and attain a breakthrough, increasing your chances of passing the regional selection." Ralph nodded, but when he looked at Fang Xinjian, a hint of hostility flashed in his eyes. "Since that's the case, why did you invite this guy over? Is he blind?" Edmund smiled and said, "Based on our investigations, Fang Xinjian has great talent in guiding martial arts. Moreover, although he is blind, his sword arts realm is very high, and he excels in guiding others. Therefore, I hope that he can help our elite class and guide you in your martial arts every day." Hearing Edmund's words, although Hamel was displeased, he only let out a cold snort and did not rebut Edmund. It was because he had to admit that Fang Xinjian's martial arts realm was indeed very high, to the point where he could guide them. Moreover, he had received news that Fang Xinjian was already able to discern locations through sound, and was able to sense movements at supersonic speeds. Rhoda had no objections to this. She had been defeated by Fang Xinjian previously and was very impressed by his sword arts realm and martial arts technique. However, Ralph frowned. He had been engrossed in his cultivation and had only come out from seclusion after the war ended. It was because he was worried about Fang Xinjian. He did not know how Fang Xinjian would be able to guide others after losing his sight. As if seeing through Ralph's doubts, Edmund smiled and introduced, "Xinjian cultivates the supreme Mistwind sword and can control the flow of the atmosphere. Coupled with his ability to discern locations through sound, he is no different from an ordinary person. As long as it's not supersonic speeds, he will be able to sense everything clearly." Edmund looked at Fang Xinjian and said, "Xinjian, I'll have to trouble you to guide the elite class. After all, this is a major matter for the academy and concerns all of our futures. As for the supplementary classes, let's not do it for now. It's just a small matter and is not as important as the elite class." "Oh right, I heard that your fee is 5 gold per person per month. We'll give you 100 gold per person. Work hard and assist Hamel and the other 2 in their martial arts cultivation every day. As long as you get good results in the regional selection, we'll definitely not treat you badly. However, the academy's finances are too tight right now. I'm afraid that we'll have to wait until after the regional selection before we give you the money." At this moment, the smiling Edmund appeared kind and graceful, filled with the disposition that a deputy headmaster should have. After all, to someone who valued his reputation the most, external appearances were the most important. Ever since he had become the deputy headmaster and received an investment of 100,000 gold, he had swept away his previous dejected aura and paid more attention to his image and reputation. Chapter 175. However, although Edgar appeared to be all smiles today, he was actually hiding a dagger behind his smile. If Fang Xinjian were to continue running the classes, his influence in the academy would grow, and he would gain both fame and fortune. How could he allow that to happen? However, he had ordered someone to investigate and found that Fang Xinjian's guidance standards were indeed very high. If he were to forcefully cancel the classes on the grounds that it would affect the order of the classes, many knights would probably be dissatisfied. Therefore, he had gotten Fang Xinjian to help him in the elite class, giving him an empty promise, putting on an act as if it was for the good of Fang Xinjian and the academy. He hoped to bully Fang Xinjian with righteousness and get him to voluntarily close down the classes. Seeing Fang Xinjian's furrowed brows, Edgar sighed and said, "Xinjian, the academy's finances are really tight right now. As the saying goes, all good steel must be used on the blade's edge. Therefore, we're thinking of spending most of the money on the elite class, including your guidance fees. We might have to pay you after the regional selection. But don't worry, as long as you pass the regional selection, I'll definitely reward you handsomely. Therefore, I hope that you can make a little sacrifice for the academy and focus all your energy on the elite class." As he said that, Edgar laughed inwardly. He had offered Fang Xinjian 300 gold a month, so of course he would be tempted. As long as Fang Xinjian accepted it, not only would he have to refund the tuition fees, his reputation would also drop greatly. Moreover, in the next 3 months or so, Fang Xinjian would have to focus on the elite class and disappear from the public's sight. With Edgar adding fuel to the fire, Fang Xinjian would be even more marginalized, and the blow to Fang Xinjian would be even greater. As for the rewards and settlement after the regional selection, from now on, his influence will only continue to weaken. I'll think of ways to get him to borrow money and get into debt. When that time comes, no one will know about his guidance in the elite class, and I'll be able to lead the students to achieve good result. It'll be a piece of cake for me to deal with him. As for the various subsidies and rewards, I'll naturally not give them to him." Thinking of this, Edgar's expression became increasingly sincere. He looked at Fang Xinjian and said, "Therefore, I'll have to trouble you this time." He bowed and said, "The dean also hopes that you can help the elite class. The hope of the entire academy rests on your shoulders." Seeing how he was bowing, a hint of surprise flashed in the eyes of Hamel and the other two. Their gazes toward Edgar seemed to have turned into one of respect. It was as if Edgar had turned into someone who was extremely passionate about the academy and devoted to his country. Edgar laughed coldly in his heart. "A 17-year-old kid, just a few words and I can make you lose your sense of direction." Thinking of this, he bowed even more deeply. It was as if he wanted to move Fang Xinjian with his emotions and reason, so that Fang Xinjian would sacrifice his tuition class to guide the elite class. But what he didn't know was that Fang Xinjian's personality was different from ordinary people even though he was only 17 years old. How would he have any feelings of responsibility, gratitude, respect, or patriotism? He simply, "It's impossible for me to give up the cram school." Fang Xinjian assessed Hamel and the other two before continuing, "And for the 3 of them, I'll only give them 2 hours a day at most. That's all the time I have. But I'll be more attentive during these 2 hours. Therefore, it's not just 100 gold per person. I want 200 gold per person, and they have to pay on the first day of every month. There's no need to talk about things like settling the accounts after the regional selection." Hearing Fang Xinjian's merciless words, Edgar frowned. He had not expected that Fang Xinjian would not fall for this. However, he still had other ways. He lifted his head and looked at Fang Xinjian with a solemn expression, saying earnestly, "Fang Xinjian, do you know what you're doing? Earning money from your classmates? Dragging the entire academy down at the most crucial moment? Do you know that you don't have any sense of the bigger picture? Can't you just bear with it for 3 months? Or do you think that the academy will shortchange you?" He pointed at Fang Xinjian, seemingly getting angrier as he spoke, filled with righteousness. "You really don't have any sense of the bigger picture, any sense of responsibility, or any sense of collective honor. How can you be so selfish, with only money in your eyes? If you insist on doing things your way, the academy will have no choice but to cancel your cram school, lest you continue to affect the normal teaching order, and let your selfish thoughts affect the other students. Of course, this is something that we don't wish to happen. As long as you continue to support the elite class, everything will go on as usual. Since I can't move you, I'll threaten you with carrots and sticks. I don't believe that you won't give in." Moreover, to him, Fang Xinjian was already blind and would have to rely on the academy for his future. How would he dare to offend him? However, Edgar, who had said these words, had clearly been an instructor for too long. He thought that every student was as obedient as he had taught them in the past, and as gullible. He had not truly tried to understand Fang Xinjian in all aspects, to understand this 17-year-old youth. He knew that Fang Xinjian had talent, that Fang Xinjian liked to fight, and that Fang Xinjian was very impulsive. However, Fang Xinjian was still blind. However, what he did not know was that Fang Xinjian had the world's best sword arts talent, had a lifespan of 5 years, and had a blood feud. Furthermore, Fang Xinjian would never compromise. Back then, even the first prince had not been able to force Fang Xinjian, let alone a vice-headmaster like him. Therefore, the moment Edgar finished his words, Fang Xinjian's brows furrowed furiously. It was as if he could hear the sound of blood gushing out in his body. Green veins popped up on his forehead, as if there was a ball of black chi swirling up in the center of his brows. Fang Xinjian slowly raised a finger and said in Edgar's direction, "I don't like the way you speak and the way you do things. Therefore, I'll just talk to the 3 of them directly." The next moment, a piercing white glow spread out from Fang Xinjian's finger to his entire body. Edgar felt as if a sun had suddenly appeared before his eyes, and the violent light waves turned everything before him into white. If he had known about flash grenades, he would definitely feel that the scene before him was very similar to being hit by a flash grenade. However, although he did not know about flash grenades, he knew about the sword technique Fang Xinjian was displaying. Radiant light sword technique. Unable to see anything, his first reaction was to adopt a defensive stance. His reduced force field trembled all over his body, protecting him from head to toe. Absolute light brought absolute darkness. Edgar was unable to see anything, but to Fang Xinjian, it was the same as usual. He had long since become one with the darkness. As for Edgar's stance, it did not matter to him whether it was there or not. Waves of air gushed forth, and Edgar only felt a pain in his stomach. His chest had already been kicked 3 times, and then his knees went limp. He was already half kneeling on the ground, and then he felt another pain in his chin. He was sent flying with a kick, landing on the ground. In less than a second, he had been kicked 5 times in a row. Each move was vicious and merciless, causing him to drop to the ground. He only felt as if his heart was about to burn up. Endless fury descended from the heavens, causing him to bellow and stand up. "Fang Xinjian, you! How dare you? What are you doing? Do you know what you're doing?" Edgar lifted his head. His face was bruised and swollen, as if he had just been beaten up by a group. What he cared about the most was his reputation. After his failure, what he wanted the most was to trample on Jackson and become the headmaster himself, leaving his name in history. For someone who cared about his reputation, To be defeated by his own student and even beaten up badly, how furious was he? The light gradually dissipated, and Fang Xinjian tilted his neck and asked, "What did I do?" "Attacking a teacher, attacking a prefectural academy's deputy headmaster," he bellowed. "Fang Xinjian, you're finished. Let me tell you, you can forget about becoming a knight." "Did I hit you?" Fang Xinjian said coldly. "Did you see it?" His body seemed to sway, and Edgar was sent flying with a bang, landing over 10 meters away. Fang Xinjian smiled coldly and shook his leg, saying calmly, "Did you see me make a move? Didn't you fly out yourself?" He looked toward Hamel and the other two and asked, "Did any of you see me make a move?" Chapter 176. Looking at Fang Xinjian's gaze, Hamel and the other two were slightly stunned. Seeing their silence, Fang Xinjian said calmly, "Before me, what difference is there between you and a blind man?" The three of them wanted to retort, but thinking of Fang Xinjian's earlier actions, they had indeed not seen it clearly. They did not even know how many times Fang Xinjian had kicked Edgar. How could he be so fast? Compared to the fact that Fang Xinjian had beaten up Edgar, the three of them were more astonished by the fact that Fang Xinjian's speed seemed to be even faster than before. Moreover, when he had performed the radiant light sword technique earlier, it was as if he had not lost his sight. Right now, the Fang Xinjian before them with his eyes closed seemed to be even more terrifying than before. However, at the next moment the three of them thought of something. Thank goodness, thank goodness. The regional selection requires the Pantheon Monument observation. With him losing his sight, it's impossible for him to pass this stage. In the end, he's still lagging behind us. It's impossible for him to participate in the regional selection. A look of relief flashed in Hamel's eyes. Ralph shook his head, looking at Fang Xinjian's face with a look of pity. Only Rhoda stared at Fang Xinjian's tightly shut eyes, as if wanting to see his eyes. She suddenly had a feeling that he might really be able to attain heaven's perception and pass the regional selection. But how is that possible? Attaining heaven's perception in 3 months? It's only been 6 months since he transitioned. How is this possible? Fang Xinjian asked casually, then turned to look in Edgar's direction. Edgar let out an enraged bellow and appeared 100 meters away with a flash. He took out a foldable longbow from his waist, and with a sudden burst, streams of electricity shot out from all over his body, circling around Fang Xinjian at supersonic speed. As the son of the former headmaster and the genius who had been the prefectural champion back then, his abilities had long since reached the pinnacle of the first transition, and he was even slightly stronger than clan elders like Rebecca. In an instant, he could even move at supersonic speed. In the next moment, it was as if tens of thousands of meteors had streaked across the sky. Countless crossbow bolts swept over from all directions like lasers. This was yet another supersonic archery skill. Every arrow that was shot out turned into 10 scattered arrows. Fang Xinjian had no way of perceiving the supersonic archery. He did not even know how many arrows his opponent had shot in an instant. However, this did not mean that there was nothing he could do. Just as he sensed that Edgar had disappeared from his senses, he suddenly dashed forward. Even though he did not use his full power, he still dashed forward at 4 times the speed of sound. In the blink of an eye, he had dashed 500 meters away and arrived at the edge of the training field. Only then did the supersonic arrows hit Fang Xinjian's afterimage, causing a series of explosive sounds to ring out, causing the bricks on the ground to explode. Although Fang Xinjian could not see the attacks with his speed, if he were to focus on dodging, no one would be able to catch up to him. Edgar had obviously realized this as well, and he was extremely exasperated. Just as he was about to nock an arrow and shoot again, he noticed that a ball of white light had lit up on Fang Xinjian's fingertip. The radiant light sword technique was activated, and in the next moment, streams of white light shot out from all over his body, illuminating the area tens of meters around him. There was no way to see his exact location. Amidst the light, Fang Xinjian had not expected Edgar to have some martial arts. To think that Edgar had also surpassed the speed of sound, causing him to be unable to sense him. If that was the case, Fang Xinjian would probably have to rely on ether sword ripples in order to defeat Edgar. He would charge up to the approximate location, unleashing over 100 streams of ether sword ripples from 10 meters around him. However, that would be a little difficult to control. He might be able to kill Edgar with a single sword attack, or all of his attacks might miss. Faced with the radiant light sword technique, Edgar hesitated for a moment. If he could not see, it would be hard for him to hit his target. Just as he was thinking if he should use an area attack to test the waters, a sound rang out from afar. A few instructors dashed toward the training ground and shouted from afar, "Deputy Headmaster, what's the matter? What's the matter? Do you need our help?" Seeing this scene, Edgar frowned slightly, and a hint of embarrassment flashed on his face. He put down his bow and arrow and retreated far away with a swoosh, showing no signs of hesitation. Hamel, Ralph, and Rhoda looked at the departing Edgar in astonishment. None of them could understand what had happened. To think that the deputy headmaster had left just like that? Although he had not managed to take down Fang Xinjian in the earlier battle, no matter what, Fang Xinjian was blind. Even if Fang Xinjian's speed was 10 times faster than his, Edgar would still be able to fight him. Why would he leave? A hint of comprehension flashed in Hamel's eyes. I heard that Edgar values his pride the most and is someone who can suffer for the sake of his pride. Now that I look at it, that's really the case. Hamel's guess was not wrong. Edgar had planned on fighting it out with Fang Xinjian to the end, wanting to suppress him so that he would know his place. However, he had been beaten black and blue by Fang Xinjian at the start. If the instructors who had rushed over were to see this, what would the outcome be? The news would probably spread like wildfire the next day. The entire academy would know that he had tried to have a talk with Fang Xinjian, but had been taught a lesson because of a disagreement. Then he had been unable to defeat Fang Xinjian, and had been beaten black and blue. It was only when a few instructors had come to stop him that he was saved. How could Edgar possibly tolerate something like this? Therefore, he decided to leave immediately, not wanting to meet the few instructors. At the same time, he said in a clear voice, "Xinjian, since that's the case, then it's decided. You'll be the one to guide the elite class in their martial arts. As for the specifics, you guys can discuss it amongst yourselves." He looked as if he had just finished a discussion, but only Hamel and the other two could hear the threat in his words. The few instructors who had rushed over looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. However, Fang Xinjian let out a cold laugh and retracted the radiant light sword technique. He looked at Hamel and the other two. Since Edgar had given up on pursuing the matter, there was no way he would continue to pester them. He had too many things he needed to do, so he did not have the time to waste on them. He looked at the three of them and asked directly, "How about it? I'll guide you guys in your martial arts for 200 gold a month. Are you guys interested?" The three of them looked at each other and did not reply immediately. Just as Fang Xinjian thought that the three of them were unable to put down their pride and would not accept the offer, Rhoda was the first to step out. She stared at Fang Xinjian and said, "It's true that I admire your martial arts very much. However, I heard that we can try out your classes for a day. I wonder if we can try out the feeling of 200 gold a day?" Fang Xinjian smiled, "Of course." An inexplicable smile appeared on Hamel's face, which was like the spring water in the mountains. He said calmly, "Then count me in as well." Ralph turned back and let out a cold snort saying, "I'll practice my sword myself. I don't need anyone to guide me." Sensing that Ralph had left, Fang Xinjian did not say anything. He only walked up to Rhoda and Hamel and said, "The two of you can just stay here and practice the martial arts you're currently practicing. As long as it's something related to the circulation of the body, I can give you guidance." With that, He lifted his finger and continued to practice the radiant light sword technique. Rhoda and Hamel exchanged a glance. In the end, Rhoda was the one to step out and say, "Then let me demonstrate a set of spear arts first." Fang Shijian smiled, looking at Rhoda and Hamel like he was looking at two fat sheep. In order to gather enough money to participate in the auction for the human skulls, he was putting in more and more effort. Chapter 177. This was the first time Rhoda was receiving guidance from Fang Shijian. As she swept out with her silver spear, Fang Shijian's empty hand formed a sword with his fingers, and with a tap of his sword, over 10 streams of grand sword currents appeared in the air. The streams of sword cheese were like swimming snakes, surrounding Rhoda in an unhurried manner. Seeing Rhoda's slightly stiff movements, Fang Shijian said calmly, "Don't be nervous, it won't hurt." Rhoda nodded and continued to practice a set of nurturing spear technique. Each and every one of her movements caused strong gales to explode, releasing thunderous booms. The ponytail on her head bounced up and down, and each spear technique displayed an extreme power and beauty. Her slender and powerful limbs continued to move and burst forth, displaying the beautiful lines of her body. However, she was not as muscular as Lilia and was more slender and streamlined. She was like the Valkyrie from the northern mystical mythology. Just as she was practicing this set of spear techniques, the streams of sword cheese released by Fang Shijian surrounded her like swimming snakes. In the blink of an eye, they had already neared Rhoda's body and started to hit her. With each hit, Rhoda could feel a gush of force entering her body. It was as if an electric current was flowing through a part of her body, incessantly guiding the circulation and movements of her spear techniques. After a short few minutes, she started to realize that the proficiency and effects of her spear techniques had increased. This was because Fang Shijian had focused all of his energy, which had been distributed to 50 people, onto her alone. Naturally, she could feel that the effects were even more powerful. However, after practicing for a while, Rhoda's face was already flushed red. It was because she could feel streams of sword cheese surrounding her body, as if countless warm little hands were pressing down and patting on her body, causing her to feel a strange sense of shame. However, despite the shame, the thrill of the continuous increase in her proficiency and potential made her unwilling to stop. Instead, she continued to persevere in her practice. She did not know that the care she was receiving was over 50 times that of an ordinary female student. After 10 minutes, her entire skin seemed to be trembling, her cheeks flushed red, and her forehead was covered in perspiration, drenching her hair. Finally, as she thrusted out her spear, she could not help but let out a soft moan. The next moment, she looked at Fang Shijian with a murderous gaze. She clenched her teeth and said, "Fang Shijian." Fang Shijian was blind, so how could he possibly know the state he was in? He only asked curiously, "What's wrong? Why do I feel that your heartbeat and blood flow were very fast? Even your breathing has become rapid? You've only been cultivating for a short period of time. Your stamina shouldn't be this bad." Looking at Fang Shijian's innocent look, Rhoda bit her lips, and her face seemed to turn even redder. This also added a hint of seductiveness to her valiant and heroic bearing. She gritted her teeth and said, "I'm going to change my clothes before coming back to cultivate." Of course, Fang Shijian could not stop them. However, Hamel threw a strange glance at Rhoda, feeling that she looked a little strange. He sniffed and asked, "What's this smell?" Rhoda, who had walked a distance away, almost tripped when she heard that. However, with her back facing the two of them, her face turned even redder. However, she was never one to admit defeat. There were differences between men and women in many aspects, and this difference was even more crucial when it came to the path of martial arts. For example, menstruation, the weakness of having a cold body, and the advantage of having a more slender body, excellent endurance, and a lighter body. Because of the differences in various aspects, the cultivation between men and women was naturally different. Rhoda's performance just now was due to the difference in skin quality between men and women. The stratum corneum of men was 2 to 3 times thicker than that of women. Therefore, their skin was rougher, while women's skin was smoother and more sensitive. Therefore, when women started practicing martial arts, they would face more pain than men. Ordinary female knights did not have money, so their skin would naturally become rougher and thicker as they trained. However, a wealthy person like Rhoda would not be like that. She had to take and wash up daily, taking medicinal meals that were good for her skin and body. This was why her skin was still smooth and tender even after she started practicing martial arts, and why she could still maintain her slender body with feminine features. And ever since she had become a knight, with the reduced force field protecting her body, she would not injure her skin after training. This allowed her skin to maintain its sensitivity. Not only could she maintain her appearance, but her sensitive skin would also be able to sense the minute changes in the air during battles. In the changing room, Rhoda thought of the embarrassing scene from earlier and clenched her fists tightly. How could I possibly lose here? Didn't I just want to prove that women are never weaker than men? She ordered the maid outside the door, "Help me get a cotton towel." No matter what, Fang Shijian's guidance very quickly gave Rhoda and Hamel a taste of sweetness. These two aristocrats were very willing to enjoy Fang Shijian's guidance for 3 months at a price of 600 gold in the 3 months before the regional selection. This year's regional selection was very important. As renowned geniuses, the two of them had received a large sum of money from their families. Just like that, another 3 days passed. Fang Shijian had earned an additional 400 gold from the two of them, and he had 90 sword techniques that had reached the maximum level. His unparalleled sword intent was only 10 sword techniques away from reaching the maximum level before it could attain a breakthrough. As he walked, sat, or lay down, there seemed to be sword theories faintly emitting from his body. Edgar never appeared again, as if he was afraid of embarrassing himself. He only returned to the academy after the injuries on his face had completely healed. He did not interfere with the current situation of the elite class. However, the resources they had arranged for Hamel and the other two would be sent over daily, continuously strengthening the trio's abilities. On this day, Ferdinand and the others finally rushed back. They could not be bothered with eating, bathing, or resting. They rushed over to Fang Shijian excitedly. "It's done." Ferdinand smiled. "There's a total of 14 corpses. They've all arrived at my house, and we're just waiting for the buyers to come." Fang Shijian nodded and asked, "How much longer before the auction starts?" 8 days, Ferdinand said. "Although the time is a little tight, it should be enough. The only worry now is that we won't be able to earn enough money from selling the corpses." Fang Shijian looked at Ferdinand and asked, "Then do you have any ideas?" Ferdinand smiled, a hint of confidence flashing in his eyes. It was an absolute confidence that Fang Shijian had never seen before. "If you were to ask me about spear arts, I might hesitate a little. But selling things? I'm sorry, I'm really an expert in this area." He looked at Robert and Anthony and said, "The two of you follow me back tonight. We have work to do tomorrow." Chapter 178. Have you heard? Someone is purchasing the remains of First Transition Knight. I heard that it's that great aristocrat who wants to purchase a large amount of remains. It seems like they want to refine something. What great aristocrat? It's the Academy. They're collecting remains, wanting to forge an inferior divine weapon to help the students participate in the regional selection. At the table, the two merchants exchanged a glance and left in a hurry. Similar news was secretly circulating through all of Kirst's underground channels. In the basement, Anthony covered his nose, his face pale as he looked at Ferdinand, who was continuously cutting and grinding the corpses. He felt like he was about to vomit. "What are you doing?" Ferdinand continued to decorate the corpses without a change in his expression, saying, "Other than their bones, the other things of First Transition Knights can't be used to forge remains divine weapons. They're worthless. Although these black people are black, their bones are as white as ours. As long as we polish and decorate them a little, no one will be able to tell that they were Garcia's great warriors when they were alive. Anthony turned his head, not daring to look at Ferdinand. What's the use of this? What's the use? Ferdinand lifted his head and looked at Anthony as if he was looking at an idiot. Garcia's great warriors are much weaker than our empire's knight. If we were to sell their remains or the remains of the empire's knights, which would be more valuable? Ferdinand shook his head helplessly. If not for the fact that the remains of conferred knights are too different from those of knights, I could even disguise these Garcia's great warriors as conferred knight. With that, he pointed to the pile of bones that had been processed and said, "All right, you can take that pile away. Bring it to the place I told you about earlier. There'll be someone offering 2,000 gold to buy it from you. You can just sell it to him." 2,000 gold? It can be sold for so much? Anthony's eyes were wide open as he said, "From what I know, the remains of an ordinary level 19 knight can only be sold for over 1,000 gold. After all, even if you were to bring it over, you'd still need to go through many procedures and other materials before you can forge a good remains divine weapon. You're even faking it." He knocked on the fake remains and shook his head. "If I were to buy it, I'd only be able to pay 600 gold at most." Hee, that's right. Everyone will think that 2,000 gold is too much. That's why they'll fall for it. Ferdinand laughed. Anthony frowned. After thinking for a while, he understood. "You're planning something? Selling and buying? Will it work? Have you heard? This time around, Governor Devitt plans to choose one of the 10 who passed the regional selection as his disciple. The governor wants to be his disciple." "Really? Where did you hear this news? How could this be fake?" Becoming the governor's disciple means that in the entire Great Western region, one would be second only to one and above all. Why do you think there are so many people buying the remains recently? I heard that someone bought one for 2,000 gold yesterday. Today, someone in Dong City also said he would buy it. Ferdinand looked at Hailong helplessly and said, "I'm sorry, Hailong. I'll be keeping this rib for my own use." Hailong immediately stood up and said angrily, "Ferdinand, what nonsense are you spouting? Didn't you say that you would give this bone to me?" Ferdinand touched the bone before him affectionately and sighed. "This is an ancestor's bone that has been passed down in our clan. Not only does it have great prowess, but it also holds an extraordinary meaning to me. Moreover, this is a rib, the best material to make a spearhead. It's suitable for me and complements my spear art." Hailong said anxiously, "You can't go back on your words. We agreed on a price of 70 gold. Are you thinking of raising the price?" "It's not that I want to raise the price." Looking at how anxious Hailong was, Ferdinand said hesitantly, "It's Barbara who doesn't want me to sell it. She said that she has something important to talk to me about. It's regarding the upcoming regional selection. It seems to be related to the governor." Hailong's gaze narrowed and he said, "What did you say?" Ferdinand laughed and said, "Look, Barbara is here." After Barbara walked in, she went straight to Ferdinand's side and grabbed him, saying, "Ferdinand, don't sell that rib bone yet." Hailong said angrily, "Are you kidding me? We've already agreed on a price. How can you not sell it just like that?" Barbara smiled coldly at Hailong and said, "Humph, you're here to take advantage of me, right?" Hailong said weakly, "What do you mean by that?" He turned to Ferdinand and said, 90 gold. Is that enough? The rib is mine now." With that, he tossed the rib on the table aside, picked it up, and left. After Barbara saw him leave, she pouted and said, "I didn't know that this Hailong was quite rich. Could it be that he sold off his clan's shop to gather the money? TSK, why doesn't he look at himself in the mirror? Someone like him wants to fight for the regional selection?" She then stretched out her hand toward Ferdinand and said, "We've agreed on 5 gold. Give it to me. Take it yourself." Ferdinand stroked his chin and thought to himself, It seems that selling it in pieces is the most profitable. It's a pity that there's not enough time. I can only change to another method. Hailong excitedly carried a rib bone and walked out, thinking to himself, it's a pity. With this, I won't have enough money to register for Fang Xinjian's classes. But with this rib as the spearhead, I can get my father to help me find someone to forge an inferior divine weapon. With that, my battle prowess will increase by at least 50%. In the basement, Robert looked at the incomplete remains in front of him and said, "Aren't there 14 of them? Why is there another one?" Ferdinand grinned and said, "I discovered a complete corpse. It looks too new, and only by losing some parts will it give people a sense of age. They won't suspect Garcia. I had wanted to sell it in pieces to some poor fools, but it seems that there's no time now. I'll just piece them together and sell them to those who don't know what's good for them." Robert shook his head and turned to look at Ferdinand, feeling sorry for the many people who had been scammed. In Fang Xinjian's study, Manny was reading a book. The human body is an inner world, and the universe is a large world. Heaven's perception requires the human's will to interact with the will of the world. However, the world can't speak, so we must learn how to communicate with the world. Each advancement in the 10 heavenly barriers is a deeper understanding of the world's will. Manny nodded and said, "This Luo Butcha's words are quite interesting. Is the world also a type of will, like humans?" He smiled and looked toward Fang Xinjian, saying, "Why? I heard that you've been crazily setting up classes to earn money?" Fang Xinjian threw him a glance and said, "What's the matter? If you're thinking of targeting the parietal bones, you can give up." Manny sighed, a look of disappointment flashing in his eyes. "That thing has already been reserved." Chapter 179. Fang Xinjian's countenance did not look too good. He asked Manny, "What do you mean by it has been reserved?" Manny shrugged. "Although it's quite effective to rent out a conferred knight's parietal bone for 6 hours, it still depends on the user's aptitude. It's hard to say how much it can really help one in attaining heaven's perception. Under normal circumstances, it's already very good if it can be sold for 18,000 to 20,000 gold. Fang Xinjian nodded in agreement. This was about the same as Ferdinand's judgment. If it exceeded 20,000, then this parietal bone would not be worth it. After all, it could only help increase one's chances of attaining heaven's perception, but it was just an increase. It was just a feeling. Manny sighed and said, "Initially, I also wanted to fight for it, but this time around, there's a super rich guy. He offered a price of 30,000 gold and told everyone not to fight with him." 30,000 gold? Fang Xinjian frowned and asked, "Why? This is far above the market price. Why would he do this?" "First, of course it's because he's rich, too rich. To him, although an additional 10,000 gold is a little painful, it's just a little." Manny sighed and said, "Secondly, it's because of a recent rumor. It's said that Governor Devitt wants to choose someone to be his last disciple in this regional selection. Of course, everyone wants to fight for it. If one can become Governor Devitt's disciple, then power, wealth, and various cultivation resources will be within reach, allowing one to become one of the upper echelons of the entire empire. Of course, if one can attain heaven's perception before the regional selection, it'll greatly increase the chances of one gaining Lord Devitt's favor. After all, to be able to attain heaven's perception without the aid of the regional academy's resources, such aptitude is no small matter." Saying this, Manny smiled. Although it's hard to say how much of a help the parietal bone would be, who asked him to be rich? Fang Xinjian did not say a word, but his frown deepened. To the others, although this regional selection was of great importance, they would not despair even if they did not get it. However, to Fang Xinjian, if he were to miss out on this year's regional selection, he would have to wait another 2 years. How could he allow that? He only had less than 4 years of lifespan left. In another 2 years, he wouldn't even be able to participate in the next national selection. And if he wanted to take revenge on the Onassis clan and Caroline, it was necessary for him to be at the divine level. Even if he wanted to truly stand before them and the Fang clan's old granny, Li Shuanghua, he would still need to be at the pinnacle of second transition level 29. Therefore, to Fang Xinjian, the regional selection this time around was a must-win, and he would not miss it. And if he wanted to pass the regional selection, he would first have to attain heaven's perception. To him, the value of this parietal bone for 6 hours was too important. Manny threw a surprised glance at Fang Xinjian. Even he could tell that Fang Xinjian's emotions were not quite right. He asked, "What's the matter with you?" Fang Xinjian shook his head. "It's nothing. Let's continue." "Oh right. What's the name of the guy who spread the news?" After Fang Xinjian finished his conversation with Manny, he walked out late at night and went to Ferdinand's place. Ferdinand opened the door and looked at Fang Xinjian in surprise, asking, "Why are you here?" "There's trouble." Fang Xinjian hurriedly sensed the surroundings, and after ascertaining that everyone was present, he walked in. The moment he sat down, he went straight to the point and asked, "How much did those bone remains sell for?" Ferdinand said, "There's a total of 14 of them. I've put in a lot of effort and managed to sell them for a total of 19,054 gold. In addition to the 285 gold you earned from your tuition class and the 400 gold you earned from the elite class, we have a total of 19,587 gold now." Fang Xinjian said calmly, "And that house in the suburbs was sold for 500 gold. Together with my own savings, we have a total of 20,587 gold." Ferdinand yawned and smiled. "All right, that should be enough. At most, I'll lend you some. It'll be enough for you to buy the parietal bone for 6 hours 2 days later." Fang Xinjian shook his head and asked, "Have you heard of a person called Bruno?" "Bruno? He can be considered a profligate, but he's a very rich man." Ferdinand said, "His grandfather is a conferred knight who works in the imperial capital's Ministry of Finance. There's probably no one in Kurst who is richer than him." Fang Xinjian frowned and said, "Bruno is going to participate in this auction as well. Moreover, he has already spread the news that he's going to get this parietal bone even if he has to pay 30,000 gold. 30,000 gold? Ferdinand gasped. This guy is really a prodigal. Are you sure that what he said is true? Fang Xinjian asked. Ferdinand smiled bitterly and said, "This guy doesn't treat money as money at all. The various businesses under his family's name are enough for him to spend for 10 lifetimes. But why does he want the parietal bone? Based on what I know, his aptitude is only average. He should know that even if he were to use it, he wouldn't be able to attain heaven's perception." Fang Xinjian threw a glance at him and said, "Because he heard the news that Governor Devitt is going to choose a disciple in the regional selection." Ferdinand had been the one to spread the news that Devitt was going to choose a disciple in the regional selection. He had not expected that this news would not only help him sell off Garcia's great warrior's remains for a huge sum of money, but it would also attract the tycoon Bruno as his competitor. However, he reacted in the next moment. Although his aptitude isn't good, as long as he buys it for 6 hours, even if he doesn't succeed, he can still prevent others from succeeding and increase the chances of being chosen. This damn tycoon. He felt as if he had shot himself in the foot. Half an hour later, Robert, Anthony, Ferdinand, and Fang Xinjian gathered in the room, not saying a word. Anthony was the first to break the silence, asking, "Xinjian, are you sure that you must need this parietal bone? Even if it's 2 years later?" "No." Fang Xinjian's tone was filled with determination. "I must get my hands on it," he said in a cold tone. "If it really doesn't work out, I can only snatch it." "Don't," Ferdinand said. "The people who came with the parietal bone aren't that simple. I've received news that there's at least one conferred knight among them. That's an empire's conferred knight, not someone as weak as Garcia's destined warrior. Bruno came because he received news that the governor is going to take in a disciple in the regional selection. Robert touched his neck and said, "Then can we ask him out and talk things out with him?" Ferdinand sighed and said, "It's useless. Why should he believe us? There's no way to prove such a thing." Yes, it was true that the governor was going to take in a disciple in the regional selection. However, there was no way to verify whether they believed it or not. It was purely up to the people themselves. After all, it was impossible for them to ask the number one character in the Great Western region if he was going to take in a disciple in the regional selection. Ferdinand had been very pleased with his plan, but he had not expected that even he would not be able to dispel this piece of news. Anthony continued, "Why don't we think of a way to hold Bruno back and prevent him from participating in the auction?" Chapter 180. It's useless. Ferdinand then shook his head. Bruno is an idiot. He has already announced this before the auction has even started. Although he has caused many competitors to appear in advance, although many competitors have appeared in advance, it has also caused more people to think that the matter of Governor Devitt choosing a disciple is real. Even if we can stop Bruno from participating in this auction, there will still be other people who will participate in the intense competition. I had originally estimated the price to be 20,000 gold, but I didn't take into account this situation. Saying this, a hint of understanding flashed in Ferdinand's eyes. No wonder when I spread the news, I felt that there were other influences helping to spread the news. I couldn't understand it at first, but now that I think about it, it must be those people who are bidding for the 6 hours. They also want to sell it for a high price. Fang Shijian nodded. He was determined to get his hands on the human skulls. The auction had yet to start, but the price limit had been raised again and again. The money he had now would be a huge sum no matter where it was placed, but it was not enough to participate in this auction. During the continuous discussion, one method after another was thrown out and then rejected. The discussion continued until the sky was about to brighten. The four of them were unable to come up with a solution. Anthony fell onto the sofa and said dejectedly, "Why don't we just rob Bruno? Rob him of his money and bring it to the auction?" Ferdinand's lips twitched as he said, "Offending a conferred knight, a high-ranking official of the Empire. You can go yourself. I won't accompany you to your death." "Impersonate Bruno?" Fang Xinjian said in deep thought as he looked at the gradually brightening sky outside the window. "Impossible," Ferdinand said. "If we want to control Bruno with his grandfather's influence, it'll be very troublesome if he insists on pursuing the matter. We have to hide our identities from him and those people who are selling the human skulls. We have to hide both sides and snatch Bruno's money. He also has experts under him that his grandfather had sent him. Who knows what other remains divine weapons they might have. Once our identities are exposed, we'll be in big trouble." "No." Fang Xinjian shook his head and suddenly smiled. "Maybe we can really impersonate them." He turned to look at Ferdinand and asked, "That Bruno, has he ever come into contact with a conferred knight's human skulls?" "There shouldn't be any. There are only 5,000 conferred knights in the entire country. Every year, there are at most 20 conferred knights who die from accidents, battles, or old age. Among them, there are at most 5 who are level 25 and above. Some of them were kept by their clans, while others were kept by the royal family. However, most of them were kept by the various regional academies. Almost 80% of the skulls were kept by the regional academies to nurture the next generation of conferred knight. In order to come into contact with these things, it was not a matter of money. If it was not because the temptation of the regional selection was too great, the academies in the northern ice region would not have brought out their skulls. And with Bruno's flamboyant personality, if he had used the skull before, he would have already said so. Fang Shijian nodded. "That's good. Since he hasn't used the skull before, there's a way. Ferdinand asked curiously. What method? Fang Shijian laughed. 2 auctions. Ferdinand was stunned for a moment. However, he was very quick-witted and immediately reacted. 2? Fang Shijian asked, leaving the skull in their own academy and not handing it over to the regional academy. This is against the rules to begin with. Therefore, their auctions have always been carried out in secret, and they have not dared to publicize it. He stood up and paced left and right, his brain working at high speed as he mumbled incessantly. If it's the venue, it shouldn't be a problem. If it's manpower, we'll just use my clan's death warriors. No, if we can earn a sum of money while we're at it, we can also invite a few people over. They probably haven't seen Bruno before either. There's a chance, there's really a chance. Ferdinand's eyes grew increasingly brighter, while Robert and Anthony, who were at the side, wore strange expressions. What's the matter? Ferdinand, what idea have you come up with? Ferdinand shook his head. There are a few crucial pieces of information that I still need to verify. If there's no problem, we can hold 2 auctions. However, there's still the most important thing. He turned to look at Fang Shijian and asked, How are you planning to deceive Bruno? Fang Shijian said calmly, In my hometown, there was a similar situation. I'm planning to give it a try. How? Fang Shijian said, Give me 500 gold and I'll make a trip to Netherworld Valley personally. I'll leave the rest to you. Seeing how the 2 of them seemed to be talking in riddles, Anthony could not hold it in any longer and asked again, What's the situation? What's the specific plan? Ferdinand smiled. You'll know tonight. On the day of the auction, in front of a building in Cursed known as the Black Hall. This cylindrical building had a total of 2 floors. Due to the vast space inside, it had always been treated as the best gathering place. Today, both floors had been rented. It was because an auction that only Cursed aristocrats and members of the upper echelon knew about would be held here. Of course, to Fang Shijian and the others, it was 2 auctions. A group of people shrouded in black robes alighted from the horse carriage and walked towards the back door of the Black Hall. A man dressed in a tuxedo walked over with his head lowered. He came before the man in black robes and bowed, saying, Welcome, everyone. The man in black robes asked coldly, Where's Bennett? Lord Bennett is entertaining the guests in the hall. I heard that you guys do not wish to reveal your identities, so I've arranged for the horse carriage to be parked at the back door. The man in the tuxedo lifted his head, revealing his face. It was Ferdinand. He smiled and looked at the man in black robes, asking, Sir, are you satisfied? The man in black robes fell silent for a moment. A suffocating aura gushed forth, and just as Ferdinand's temples and forehead were sweating profusely, feeling that he was about to drop to his knees from the pressure, the man in black robes finally spoke. Let's go. Ferdinand nodded with a grim countenance. Yes. Gentlemen, please follow me. This time around, we've invited the few most capable buyers in Cursed. I believe that today's transaction will not disappoint you. Moreover, it's all according to your instructions. It's a secret auction, and no one's identity will be revealed. The man in black robes did not say a word. Ferdinand turned his head, excitement flashing in his eyes as he led the group of men in black robes to the first level of the Black Hall. On the other side, at the main entrance of the Black Hall, under the lead of many attendants in black robes, the buyers arrived at the front door of the Black Hall and were led to the second level of the Black Hall. Most of these buyers had covered their faces with robes, so as to not reveal their identities. On one hand, this was a requirement of the auction, and on the other hand, they did not wish to reveal their wealth. Furthermore, if they managed to win the bid for the skull, all the more they did not wish to reveal their identities. However, there were some who did not care. A man wearing a golden mask walked up to the hall on the second level, shouting loudly. Haha, everyone, I'm determined to win this time around. The skull is very important to me, so I'll have to trouble everyone to give me some face. Just like that, under Ferdinand's special arrangements, The buyers walked up to the second level, while the sellers stayed on the first level. The two auctions on the two levels were about to start at the same time. On the first level, the leader in black robes had just sat down when he frowned and asked, "Why is it so noisy outside?" Ferdinand's heart sank. What kind of hearing does this guy have? This hall is almost completely soundproof, and he can even hear the sounds outside. He smiled and tried to cover it up. It's nothing much. It's just that one of the corridors is being repaired today. The leader in black robes did not pay Ferdinand any heed, and said to the person at the side, "Go out and take a look." Ferdinand chuckled and stood in front of him. "Everyone, there's no need to be so cautious. We've already reserved the entire Black Hall today. There won't be any problems." The leader in black robes let out a cold laugh and said, "Go take a look." The man in black robes walked past Ferdinand and headed for the door of the hall on the first level. Chapter 181. Under Ferdinand's nervous gaze, the man in black robes walked out of the hall and came to the door. The moment he opened the door, a series of banging sounds rang out incessantly. He looked over with a frown and saw 5 or 6 men repairing the entire corridor. He nodded, closed the door, and turned to shout in the direction of the leader in black robes, "Sir, it's fine. Someone is repairing the wall over there." Ferdinand let out a breath and thought to himself, "Thank goodness I've made arrangements." The leader in black robes asked, "Why? Aren't you going out to host the work?" Ferdinand said, "No, my job today is to receive everyone here." He pointed to a room at the top of the hall and said, "Everyone's private room is there. This time around, it's a secret auction, and all the buyers will stay in their own rooms. No one will know your identities." Other than the seats on the ground, there were also many rooms at the side that looked like spectators' stands. They surrounded the hall. It was easy for the people inside to see outside, but it was not easy for the people outside to see inside. The leader in black robes nodded and headed for the room. On the other side, the buyers who were participating in this secret auction were led by attendants to the hall on the second floor. Fang Xinjian stood in the dark while Robert said to a man wearing a golden mask, "That's him, Bruno. He's probably the winner of this auction." Fang Xinjian nodded and looked in the direction of the first floor. "I hope that everything goes well." The two auctions on the first and second floors were held at the same time. On the first floor, only the seller in black robes was real. The others were all Ferdinand's death warriors. Some were acting as attendants, while others were hiding in the private rooms, preparing to call out the bids. On the second floor, all the real buyers, including Bruno, had arrived. The only one missing was the real seller. In the auction hall on the first floor, a host walked up and started to say, "Welcome, everyone. Compared to the jokes I usually say at the beginning, I'm sure everyone is more concerned about the auction item." Then, without further ado, I'll introduce today's auction item. It's a level 25 conferred knight's parietal bone. It can help the user to sense heaven's perception, and it's rented for a total of 6 hours. There's no need to elaborate on the effects. Any expert who has the ambition to become a conferred knight will not miss out on this opportunity. 6 hours of usage is sufficient for you to completely experience the feeling of heaven's perception. There's even hope for him to achieve a breakthrough and attain the true heaven's perception. This means that he has passed the regional selection even before it has started. The host on the stage said provocative words, but the people pretending to be buyers below the stage naturally did not have any reaction. Only the leader of the black-robed men with the skull nodded slightly. He felt that this host was not bad. In the auction house on the second floor, another host walked up and began to say, "Welcome, everyone. Compared to my usual opening joke, I'm sure everyone is more concerned about the auction item. So, without further ado, let me introduce today's auction item." However, just as he was halfway through his sentence, an angry shout was heard. "Shut up. Who here doesn't know about this thing? Just start the auction." Hee, that's right. Let's start the auction. The host didn't seem to have received so many jeers before. In an instant, he was at a loss of what to do. Fang Shijian watched from a dark corner and said to Robert, "Let him start right away. It'll make up for the time difference. This way we can hurry up." With that, he headed for the door. "I'll go make some preparations." In a private room on the second floor, Bruno, who had taken off his golden mask the moment he entered, sat down boldly. He looked at the host on the stage, who was about to start the auction, and said coldly, "Directly bid 25,000. What?" The servants were stunned. Bruno said coldly, "Just bid 25,000 later. This time around, I'm determined to get it." The host received his instructions and said, "Since there's no need for introductions, we'll start right away. The starting bid for this auction is 1,000 gold. Each bid must not be lower than 100 gold." Almost at the same time as the host finished speaking, a bid rang out from Bruno's private room, 25,000 gold. At the same time, Bruno's voice rang out, "I'm sorry, everyone. I really need this piece of skull. Please give me some face. I'll definitely thank you handsomely in the future." Hearing the bid of 25,000 gold, all the buyers in the private rooms frowned. In another private room, Rhoda's pretty face furrowed. She was wearing white training clothes today. The white clothes matched well with her delicate skin, making her look especially pure and adorable. Hearing the bid of 25,000 gold, Rhoda said angrily, "This Bruno. Damn it. With his talent, it'll be a waste for him to get it." Next to Rhoda, an elderly man with a strong physique, who was sitting on a chair like a black bear, smiled and said, "He'd rather not succeed so that none of you can get it. Moreover, this Bruno guy is really rich. We can't compare to him." "Father, then what should we do?" Rhoda asked. 28,000 gold is all the liquid funds we can bring out. However, we'll probably still be surpassed by him." Rhoda's father laughed and said, "Little Rhoda, why don't you marry Bruno and earn all of their assets? Their skulls would be nothing to you." "Lord Father," Rhoda looked at her father solemnly and said, "Please don't joke around." The elderly man felt a little awkward being stared at by his daughter. He rubbed his head and said, "Haha, then let's increase the bid as well. 26,000 gold. 26,000 gold." The auctioneer shouted in astonishment, "The atmosphere has been very lively since the start of the auction. 25,000 gold has been increased to 26,000 gold. It's really an astonishing figure, but it also shows his value. 26,000 gold going once. Is there anyone else who wants to increase the bid? 27,000 gold." Hamel, who was in the private room, calmly made another bid. Beside him, his younger brother said hesitantly, "Elder brother, father only gave us 25,000 gold. Why did you make a bid of 27,000 gold? What if we can't pay up?" Seeing that his younger brother was so anxious that he was about to cry, Hamel said angrily, "I have my own stash as well. Moreover, Lochte, why are you becoming more and more delicate? You don't have any manliness at all." Lochte said, "I'm not a knight. I'm not as fearless as you guys." Hamel shook his head, "But it's still not good. It's too difficult to win against Bruno. It's a pity that 6 hours is too short. If they were willing to lend me 12 hours, then I'd look for someone to join forces with me. Then, we'd be able to split it between us for 6 hours each." Lochte said, "But even if others join forces, you still won't be able to win the bid." Not long after Hamel and the others spoke, Bruno made another bid. 30,000 gold. The charm of money was completely displayed. How much was 30,000 gold? It was almost a quarter of Cursed Academy's budget for a year. Now that it had been called out so casually by Bruno, it was as if a huge mountain was pressing down on everyone. Moreover, this huge mountain had a conferred knight backing it, making it impossible for them to blast it apart even if they wanted to. 30,000 gold going thrice. Deal. Chapter 182. In the auction hall on the first floor, the fake auction was also being carried out in an orderly manner. Similarly, the final price was slightly later than the one on the second floor, but it was also set at 30,000 gold. Looking at the auctioneer on the stage, Ferdinand's eyes narrowed slightly, and a hint of pity flashed in his eyes. It wasn't that they hadn't thought of bidding 30,000 gold to get Bruno's 30,000 gold, while bidding 28,000 gold to pay the black-robed leader 28,000 gold. Through this, they could earn some of the gold from the price difference. However, if they were to do this, it would increase the chances of them being exposed in the future. Regardless of whether it was the high-ranking official from the Ministry of Finance behind Bruno or the conferred knight who had brought the parietal bones, both of them were not to be trifled with. Therefore, in order to minimize the chances of them being exposed, they gave up on the chance to earn money. However, now that things had come to this, seeing this scene, a hint of pity flashed in his eyes uncontrollably. He nodded toward the black-robed leader, smiled, and said, "Congratulations, sir. The next transaction in the trading room has been completed. Please follow me." Therefore, he brought the black-robed leader and the others to the trading room on the first floor. On the second floor, Bruno, who was wearing a golden mask, also came to the trading room on the second floor. Both parties opened the door to the trading room at almost the same time and looked inside. On the second floor, Bruno looked toward the trading room. A black-robed man, fake, was already standing there. He walked in, followed by a few subordinates, and smiled at the black-robed man, fake. "I wonder where the parietal bones are?" The black-robed man, fake, asked in a muffled voice, "Where's the money?" Bruno clapped his hands, and one of his subordinates walked in with 10 boxes. "There's 15,000 gold in here. After the transaction is completed, which is 6 hours later, you'll pay the remaining 15,000 gold." The black-robed man, fake, nodded, gestured to his 2 subordinates behind him, and they started to move the boxes. However, before they could move the boxes, Bruno suddenly stopped them. "Wait a minute, before you take the money, I need to check if there's anything wrong with the parietal bones," he said to a middle-aged man behind him. "Let this blacksmith appraise it. Master Harmon has forged superior divine weapons before, and is very experienced with the remains of conferred knights. Take out the parietal bones first and let Master Harmon appraise them." Immediately, the atmosphere froze and everyone fell silent. Ferdinand brought the black-robed man to the trading room on the first floor. The black-robed leader took a look and discovered that a fake man wearing a golden mask was already standing there. The black-robed man walked in. The golden-masked man, fake, said, "Hello, where's the skull?" The black-robed man said, "Money in one hand, goods in the other." "Where's the money?" The golden-masked man was, fake, silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something. Just as the atmosphere began to become stiff, he nodded and said, "Of course. Bring the money in." The latter part of his sentence was directed outside. A few burly men carrying 10 large sacks walked in. Along the way, clanking sounds could be heard. That was the sound of gold coins colliding. The golden-masked man, fake, said, "That's a total of 15,000 gold coins. I'll pay the remaining 15,000 in 6 hours. How does that sound?" The black-robed man nodded and said, "Sure." As he spoke, he took out a palm-sized square box from his bosom. It turned out that he had been keeping the skull close to him all this time. Ferdinand let out a sigh of relief inwardly. "Thank goodness I still have the money from selling the remains. There should be no problem now." However, just as he was letting out a sigh of relief inwardly, the black-robed man's words made him feel anxious again. The black-robed man said calmly, "You can stay here to comprehend. Within 6 hours, you're not to leave my sight." Ferdinand immediately frowned and said with a smile, "Sir, striving to attain heaven's perception is no small matter. You'd still need a quiet and secluded environment, right? This is different from what we've agreed on previously." The black-robed man shook his head. "Within 6 hours, the parietal bones are not to leave my sight. If you're not willing, you can call off the deal. After all, there are still many people who want it. He stood there in a domineering manner, like a great mountain that could not be crossed. The aura of a second transition conferred night was released without reservation, pressing down on everyone. On the second floor, when Bruno mentioned that he wanted to verify the authenticity of the parietal bones, the place fell silent. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at the black-robed man, Fake, who had not spoken a word. Bruno suddenly said coldly, "Why? You don't dare? It can't be that you've given me a fake parietal bone, right?" Seeing that the atmosphere was getting increasingly solemn, the black-robed man, Fake, suddenly started walking toward Bruno and the others. The gazes of the four knights behind Bruno narrowed, and they immediately went forward to block him. However, before they could get close, Fang Xinjian casually performed the domineering, swift, and extremely terrifying ether sword ripples. There was no need for it to reach the limits of 8 times the speed of sound. Just a formless slash at 4 times the speed of sound was already unimaginably terrifying to a first transition professional. Sounds rang out. The four knights did not see it, did not feel it, and were completely unaware of what had attacked them. By the time they heard the soft sounds, the 4 of them had already become bald. It was as if their heads had been shaved by a hairdresser, and their hair fell to the ground. Fang Xinjian slowly walked up to Bruno, and his gloomy voice rang out. "It's fine if you want to appraise it, but the parietal bone can only be touched by one person. If he touches it, you can forget about touching it." Bruno only felt that there seemed to be a pair of extremely sharp eyes staring at him from the darkness of the black robe. He turned to look at the 4 knights who were protecting him and grinned, saying, "Good technique. To be able to cut off their hair without making a sound, it means that you can also take off their heads without making a sound." As expected of a conferred knight, Bruno naturally did not know which other knight-level experts would be able to do this. Sensing the gushing aura from the other party, as well as the miraculous technique from earlier, he immediately confirmed his earlier guess. The person protecting the parietal bone was an extremely powerful conferred knight, but his exact level was unknown. Bruno straightened his body with great difficulty and said, "But even if you're a conferred knight, you can't be so domineering, right? Can't you even appraise it?" Fang Xinjian said coldly, "If there's no effect, you don't have to pay. Just leave the 15,000 gold here first." But only one person can touch the parietal bone. Otherwise, wouldn't it be used by 2 people? It's fine if you want to do that, but you just have to pay more. Master Harmon frowned and said, "I'll only appraise it. I definitely won't secretly use the parietal bone in the process of touching it. Aren't you being too petty?" Under the black robe, Fang Xinjian's head seemed to turn over, and a sharp aura gushed out. "You're right. I'm that petty. If I say that only one person can use it, then only one person can touch it." Just as the others were about to argue, Bruno stopped them and said with a clear laugh, "All right, don't you guys trust a conferred knight?" He looked at Fang Xinjian's actions, thought about his methods, and listened to his tone. A name gradually appeared in his mind. Chapter 183. One day ago, in the basement, Ferdinand said, "Although Bruno is a profligate son, he's not an idiot. He might come up with all sorts of ridiculous requests. Therefore, I've thought of an idea." Fang Xinjian closed his eyes to cultivate, and white light shot out from his fingertip. Ferdinand did not think much of it. He had long since gotten used to Fang Xinjian's state of cultivation for almost 24 hours a day. He continued to talk to himself, "Xinjian, with your abilities, you should be able to impersonate someone. It just so happens that this skull comes from the northern ice region, and in an academy in the northern ice region, there's a headmaster who is famous for his formless sword cheese. However, he's most famous for his pettiness and violent temper." Ferdinand smiled. There's no one who has not suffered his revenge after offending him. If you can impersonate him, you should be able to suppress Bruno. Of course, such an impersonation could not be done openly, and when dealing with an intelligent person like Bruno, it would usually be more effective to intentionally or unintentionally hint to him, making him feel that he had guessed it himself. Therefore, knowing that the other party was from the northern ice region, seeing how the ether sword ripples had stunned the four knights, as well as the pettiness in this person's words, Hans Wilson. This name floated into Bruno's mind. So, it's Hans Wilson? Coming from the northern ice region and a student of a certain academy, possessing formless slashes that can instantly kill a first transition knight, and having such a temperament of haggling over every little thing. Bruno's face under the golden mask broke into a confident smile. People like him were usually very confident in their own deductions. Since he was certain that the other party was Hans Wilson, he was naturally not worried that the other party would lie to him. How could a conferred knight, a headmaster of an academy, not have such a sense of responsibility? Therefore, he dismissed his subordinates and said, "Haha, the headmaster's temper is still the same. I wonder if Brother Colin is doing well in the northern ice region?" Colin was a genius who had headed to the northern ice region from Cursed 5 years ago. He had also joined the Wilson Regional Academy, which Hans Wilson was in. Hearing Bruno's words, Fang Xinjian seemed to be surprised and fell silent. After a while, he said with slight annoyance, "I don't understand what you're talking about. Do you still want to trade or not?" However, Fang Xinjian's attempt to cover up only made him more certain. He shook his head and said, "Of course, I believe your words. Since that's the case, I'll just use this skull. 6 hours later, 30,000 gold coins will be sent to this room." Although Bruno was confident in his decision, since the other party said that he could pay 30,000 gold coins in one lump sum after using them, he naturally wouldn't pretend to be generous and ask the other party to pay 15,000 gold coins first. The attendant at the side breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Please follow me to the quiet room." One of his men asked, "Young master, do you want us to go with you?" Bruno waved his hand and pretended to be magnanimous as he said, "It's fine. To sense heaven's perception, one has to go out and do it in absolute silence. It wouldn't be good if there were too many people around. Moreover, with this sir watching, what could possibly happen to me?" After that, he smiled and walked out with Fang Xinjian. On the first floor, when the black-robed man mentioned that the other party could not leave his sight, the atmosphere fell silent. After a long period of silence, a bitter laugh rang out from under the fake mask of the golden-masked man. "To be honest, I'm just a representative. The person who bought the skull isn't me. However, my master doesn't wish to reveal his identity, so he asked me to bring it over. You know that once there's no progress after using it." A hint of understanding flashed in the black-robed man's eyes. There was nothing wrong with the reason given by the other party. After all, whether one could attain heaven's perception or not was greatly related to one's aptitude and temperament. If there was no progress after using the skull, it would naturally be very embarrassing. One might even be labeled as having no aptitude by others. This was especially so in the great clans. Once one was labeled as such by competitors, it would be very troublesome. One might even be looked down upon by the clan head and elders of the clan. The black-robed man had seen too many of such shameless people. Therefore, he did not take the other party's attempt to cover up to heart. He merely shook his head and said, "Don't worry. Tell your master to just put on a mask. I have no intention of investigating his identity. If he doesn't even have this bit of responsibility, then he can just give up on this deal." He reiterated, "But no matter what, the parietal bones must always be within my sight." The fake man with the gold mask let out a breath and said, "Then please follow me to meet my master." On the other side, Bruno followed Fang Xinjian to a quiet room and sat down. Fang Xinjian threw a glance at him and slowly took out a small gift box. Bruno looked at the box, his eyes filled with excitement and greed. However, this was a conferred night, and he did not dare to be rash. Fang Shijian opened the small gift box, revealing a piece of the parietal bones. Seeing that Bruno was about to reach out for it, he placed his hand in front of him. Looking at Bruno's nervous expression, he said calmly, "Drink a cup of water first. He'll be yours for the next 6 hours. However, you don't want to be startled awake during the sensing process due to thirst and a sore throat, right?" Bruno smiled. "Thank you for your advice." He had already completely treated the other party as a conferred knight. Taking the teapot from Fang Xinjian, Bruno took a sip. Fang Xinjian said, "All right, just moisten your throat. Don't drink too much, or you'll wake up from the suffocation." Bruno put down the teapot obediently, looked at Fang Xinjian, who was shrouded in a black robe, and said, "Now, is it okay?" Fang Xinjian pushed the small gift box over slowly. He had long since asked about the method of using the parietal bones. He said, "Place your hand on it and focus all your attention on it. Feel the waves bit by bit." Of course, Bruno had already asked about the method of using the parietal bones. He controlled his emotions and slowly placed his hand on the parietal bones, starting to focus his attention on it. However, this was just an ordinary piece of bone. How could Bruno really sense anything? A minute passed. Although Bruno focused his attention on the bone like never before, he seemed to feel something, but at the same time, he seemed to not feel anything. Of course, what he felt was just his misconception. Anyone who calmed down and focused their attention on a certain part of their body would feel something. He could not help but ask, "Master, I seem to, don't speak." Fang Xinjian said, "Use your heart to feel it." Bruno suppressed his curiosity. Gradually, he felt as if his brain was gradually heating up, and there seemed to be countless light spots flashing in his eyes. "Master, I seem to feel." Chapter 184. The world spun as endless memories, illusions, and space seemed to be stretched and shortened. Bruno only felt as if countless things were flashing past before his eyes and then disappearing. Is this the feeling of heaven's perception? Fang Shijian's figure slowly appeared. "Feel it well. This is the feeling of heaven's perception." Bruno let out a moan, feeling that his brain and limbs were extremely relaxed. It was as if there were all sorts of warm currents flowing into his body. As for what happened next, he had no memory at all. Fang Xinjian waved his hand in front of the other party's face. After seeing that the other party had no reaction, he pushed open the screen at the side and walked out from a door. The moment he walked out, Robert, who was also wearing a black robe, walked over and asked nervously, "How was it?" Fang Xinjian immediately took off his clothes, changed into a new set of clothes, and put on his mask. At the same time, he said, "It's settled. Later on, go in and pretend to be me. If I don't rush over in 6 hours, send him out. There shouldn't be a problem." Robert stuck his head out to look at Bruno, who was in the room. Seeing that the other party was in a daze and would occasionally laugh foolishly, he asked, "What did you give him to eat? Did you get it from Netherworld Valley?" "I wanted to get some non-lethal and non-addictive things from them, like some hallucinogenic poisonous mushrooms or something." Fang Xinjian tidied his clothes and said calmly, "But I saw something good with them." "What is it?" Robert asked curiously. Fang Xinjian smiled and said, "In my hometown, this thing is called Big." The black-robed man followed behind the golden-masked, fake man, taking many turns in the passageway. After about 2 minutes, the black-robed leader suddenly came to a stop and said coldly, "You've been to this place before. Are you going in circles with me?" His voice was filled with a baleful aura and killing intent. It was as if the surrounding space would turn into a river of blood in an instant. The fake, golden-masked man's body froze. In order to leave enough time for Bruno and Fang Xinjian, he naturally wanted to delay for a while. However, the black-robed leader's words had caused him to freeze in fright. It was because the conferred knight's aura was too astonishing. In that instant, the fake, golden-masked man felt as if there was blood gushing out from his nostrils. The smell of blood, which seemed to have materialized, was too terrifying. Just as he was in a daze from shock, Ferdinand walked over and said with a smile, "I'm sorry, this person might not be familiar with the structure of the buildings here. Sir, let me bring you over." Looking at the black-robed man who had left with Ferdinand, the fake man with the golden mask slowly exhaled and took off his mask, revealing Anthony's face. "This guy. His aura is too strong. Is this a conferred knight?" "It seems that the headmaster has never shown his true abilities in front of us." Ferdinand had naturally rushed over after receiving the news that Fang Xinjian had settled the matter. He brought the black-robed leader to a secret room, and when he opened it, the masked Fang Xinjian was already sitting inside. Finally, at the final moment, Ferdinand could not help but feel a little relaxed. However, he knew that it was precisely at this moment that he could not afford to relax. He kept his cool, bowed, and said, "Then I won't disturb the two of you anymore. I'll come back 6 hours later." As he left, the black-robed leader looked at Fang Xinjian and said calmly, "You're the one who bid for the skull?" "That's right." Fang Xinjian did not show any signs of weakness in terms of aura. He pointed to the table and said, "Then let's begin." Sensing the parietal bones on the table before him, Fang Xinjian's heart stirred slightly. Under the black-robed leader's gaze, he slowly pressed his hand on the parietal bones, and then continued to focus his attention on it. Gradually, he felt as if his consciousness had drifted out of his body, and there seemed to be countless pieces of information gushing toward him from the surrounding void space. Temperature, light, air composition, color, humidity. These were just the most basic ones. As more and more information gushed toward Fang Xinjian's brain, the darkness in his eyes seemed to shatter with a loud rumble, and the countless pieces of information once again formed a new vision in his mind. A vision that was even more detailed, clearer, and more useful than the naked eye. Is this heaven's perception? The countless pieces of information contained in the ether particles continued to gush into his brain, but he did not feel any discomfort. The tremendous amount of information that was rumored to be able to drive a person crazy, the tremendous amount of information that could make one extremely confused, Fang Xinjian felt that he was not affected in the slightest. It was because his sword arts talent was the best in the world, and the attributes that sword arts required, such as fortitude, courage, and determination, were things that he had long since possessed and were very strong in. At the next moment, his vision seemed to change once again. Fang Xinjian looked at his stats window and felt as if there were countless white spots of light flashing in his mind. Are these skill seeds? Heaven's perception. After entering the second transition, one would be able to understand their own body better through the information transmitted from the ether particles. He would even be able to see the skill seeds in his mind, with each light spot representing a skill. Fang Xinjian could sense that the brightest spot in the middle was flashing with endless silver light. That was the mental cultivation method, Universal Sword Dominance Lunisolar. Next to him, the one that was slightly dimmer was the waves, Sonido Sword Zephyr Waves. And among the other light spots, the brightest one was the Supreme Mistwind Sword, which was circling around them. As for the rest of the starlight, they were the various sword techniques that he had learned. It was said that after reaching the second transition, not only would one be able to see the existence of these skill seeds, but they would also be able to control these skill seeds as if they were controlling computer information, deleting or synthesizing them. Deleting meant forgetting these skill seeds, while synthesizing meant adding a supplementary skill to the main skill, combining the two skills into one. The synthesized skill would be the main skill, and the special effects of the supplementary skill would be mutated. Of course, the two synthesized skills had to be at the maximum level. The success rate of synthesizing was related to the ether particle's sensory abilities. Of course, regardless of success or failure, the supplementary skill would disappear or be forgotten. When Fang Xinjian heard this for the first time, he felt that those in the first transition were like ordinary players who could only train and level up silently. And those in the second transition were like cheating players, already able to control a portion of the data in their stats window. Of course, this was just an analogy. After all, this was the real world and not a game. The killing techniques of Huang Lin, the first prince, and the headmaster were clearly terrifying skills that had been synthesized countless times. This was especially so for the first prince. The secret manuals of the ancient path of hell recorded countless ultimate killing techniques that could only be obtained after synthesis. Each of them had astonishing prowess, and this was what he relied on to suppress countless experts single-handedly. And Garcia's warriors like Mamukia did not have any legacies and could only rely on themselves to figure things out. Their abilities were worlds apart from the Empire's conferred knight. Looking at the hundreds of dazzling skill seeds, Fang Xinjian smiled. After reaching the second transition, his sword arts talent would be able to be unleashed at an even more terrifying level. Other people would be working hard to cultivate their skills, hesitating on whether or not to synthesize them. They would be overjoyed if they succeeded, then disheartened if they failed, and continue to research the history of synthesizing different skills. Fang Xinjian would definitely be crazily smashing his sword art skills into them. Because his cultivation speed was fast enough, he was not worried that the synthesis would fail. He could not wait to smash his skills into the Ether Sword Ripples and Supreme Mistwind Sword. It's a pity that I'm only experiencing the feeling of Heaven's perception and not the real Heaven's perception. I can sense the existence of the skill seeds, but I can't really control them. Everything will have to wait until I've completed the second transition. Chapter 185. In the next moment, Fang Xinjian no longer observed the skill seed. Instead, he continued to receive the information from the ether particles, familiarizing himself with the feeling of Heaven's perception. He kept on memorizing this feeling, getting used to it. He wanted to retain this feeling so that he could truly attain Heaven's perception in the future. Throughout the entire process, although he felt that his brain was not used to it, he did not feel too much pain or that he could not take it. Other than some basic physical information, the ether particles also contained information about many people. Let's eat noodles tonight. Boss is going to deduct my salary again. What should I do next month? I want to become a knight. I need to work hard on my martial arts. All sorts of thoughts, memories, or voices were captured by the ether particles and then left behind in them. When conferred knights sensed the ether particles, they would naturally receive these personal information as well. This feeling was like the smell in the air, but it was 100 or 10,000 times more subtle and ancient than the smell in the air. It was because these personal information could have been carried by the ether particles from tens, hundreds, or even thousands of years ago, from tens, hundreds, or even thousands of kilometers away. The higher a conferred knight's level was, the deeper their perception of ether particles would be, and the more personal information they would receive. Things like personal information could only be sensed at level 25 and above. In such a situation, one could only rely on one's willpower and temperament to overcome it. Once one got lost in it, or even mistook other people's memories as one's own, one would naturally go crazy or even become a fool. There was no lack of conferred knights in history who had suddenly gone crazy during their cultivation and turned into lunatic. Therefore, conferred knights were extremely careful in the process of sensing ether particles. They had to use their boundless willpower and perseverance to maintain their true nature. However, right now, the process of sensing ether particles was extremely easy for Fang Xinjian. Although he was borrowing the parietal bones and the amount of information he could sense was not that great, it was also because he had the world's best sword arts talent. Therefore, his willpower, courage, perseverance, and other aspects had long reached top-notch standards. He did not know how heaven-defying his current performance was due to his unparalleled talent in terms of will, courage, perseverance, and memory. His ability to sense ether particles was 10 or even 100 times that of ordinary people. Once he successfully stepped into the realm of heaven's perception, his cultivation speed would also be much higher than that of ordinary people. Even the difficulties of various illusions and chaotic memories would not affect him in the slightest. On the other side, the black-robed man had been staring at Fang Xinjian the entire time. He wasn't just staring at the skull in Fang Xinjian's hand, he was also staring at Fang Xinjian's body. This lad. When ordinary people come into contact with heaven's perception, they won't be able to handle the tremendous amount of information entering their brains at once. It's either headaches, hallucinations, excitement, or madness. I have to rely on my willpower to suppress them. But his current state, the black-robed man looked at Fang Xinjian, feeling that he was too peaceful. Could it be that he has yet to enter the state of heaven's perception even with the help of the skull? No, that's impossible. No one would give up on this chance. Then, there's only one explanation. The black-robed man looked at Fang Xinjian with some astonishment. This lad is a genius in sensing ether particles. The gears in his head started to turn. I heard that the person who is most likely to be able to buy the skull this time around is a lad by the name of Bruno. He said that he would offer 30,000 gold to buy the skull. Is this lad Bruno? Seems like in a few years' time, another super genius will appear in Cursed. Just like that, Fang Xinjian only felt that a short period of time had passed. But when he reacted once again, he felt that his hand had loosened, and the skull had been taken back by the black-robed man. It was only then that Fang Xinjian gradually recovered from the world of heaven's perception. However, his mind was still immersed in it. 6 hours are up? Yes. As they spoke, Ferdinand walked in. Fang Xinjian said directly, I need to consolidate my thoughts. You guys can hand over the money yourselves. Next, Bruno would pay the money, and Ferdinand would then send the money to the black-robed man. Fang Xinjian could no longer be bothered with all this. Right now, he was fully immersed in the feeling of heaven's perception, trying to consolidate this feeling. It was only after Bruno and the black-robed man left that Ferdinand, Robert, and Anthony came to Fang Xinjian's secret room. Looking at Fang Xinjian, who was still in the midst of comprehending, a hint of excitement flashed on Ferdinand's face. To think that he has really succeeded. Ha 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 ha, that lad Bruno still thinks that he has really entered the state of heaven's perception for 6 hours. Anthony said with pity, it's a pity. Why didn't he just earn some money from it? If Bruno were to bid us 30,000, we could have bid 28,000 or 26,000 to the black-robed man and the others. This way we would be able to earn over 1,000 gold. Ferdinand shook his head. Bruno is a flamboyant person. Moreover, with so many buyers having heard the price of 30,000 gold, once the black-robed man realizes that he has received less money, he'll immediately be in big trouble. There are so many important characters here today. Do you want them to come knocking on your door one by one? He looked at Fang Xinjian and said, How is it? How is the feeling of heaven's perception? Fang Xinjian finally opened his mouth, exhaled, and said, It's like reading tens of thousands of children's diaries in one go. Fang Xinjian rubbed his forehead and said, But I feel that I've reached a bottleneck in my realm. He put out his palm and touched the surrounding space. It was as if he could feel ether particles flowing past his fingertip. I can feel that I'm just one step away. Just one step and I'll be able to attain heaven's perception. Saying this, he looked in the direction of the three of them and said, I'll have to thank you for your help this time around. How about this? I'll keep 10,000 gold from selling the remains. You guys can split the remaining money. Hearing this, Ferdinand was slightly stunned. Anthony gulped and said hesitantly, "This isn't too good, is it?" Robert was completely dazzled by the countless gold coins and became extremely excited. Even if they were to take 10,000 gold from selling the remains, each of them would still have around 3,000 gold. How huge of a sum was this? For aristocrats like Hailong, it was already extremely painful to take out tens of gold, let alone 3,000 gold to give to them. Fang Xinjian shook his head and said, "This is what you guys deserve." Of course, it was not because he had found his conscience and decided to give the three of them money. It was because what they had done today had been too daring. They had almost cheated the strongest group of aristocrats in Cursed, as well as a conferred knight. If the three of them had not received any money, and all the benefits had been taken away by Fang Xinjian, they would feel indignant and expose Fang Xinjian. If that were to happen, Fang Xinjian would be in even more trouble. In comparison, what Fang Xinjian needed the most right now was to make good use of the time to absorb what he had gained today and truly attain heaven's perception. Not only would he be able to recover a large portion of his battle prowess, he would also have a chance to participate in the regional selection. Therefore, everyone was happy. The four of them each received their own share, while Fang Xinjian left the money with Ferdinand and returned to the villa. However, the moment he returned, he saw that Manny was already sitting on his sofa, looking at him with great interest and saying, "Xinjian, you seem to be a little different? And where did you go so late at night?" Chapter 186. Seeing Manny's appearance, as well as Manny's sudden question, Fang Xinjian's heart skipped a beat. However, his expression did not change in the slightest. He sat behind his desk as usual, quietly looking in Manny's direction with his eyes closed, and said, "You're here to chat with me so late at night?" Manny smiled, as if he did not mind his earlier question. However, after he stopped smiling, his countenance suddenly turned extremely solemn. "Initially, I didn't want to come over for this matter, but the old man is even more embarrassed to come. But it's not as if no one came to inform you." Fang Xinjian frowned and asked, "What on earth is it? Don't be wishy-washy, just say it." Manny smiled bitterly and said, "Kaunitz is the only son of the Treja clan's clan head." Almost at the instant Manny said this, he felt an intense killing intent gushing toward him. This feeling was as if someone had pressed a blade against his throat, making him feel extremely fearful and uncomfortable. "Old man, you're really going to get me killed. Why should I accept this job? This won't do. I'll have to ask for an additional 100 gold when I get back." They had initially considered not telling Fang Xinjian, but as long as Fang Xinjian was not deaf, he would eventually find out about this. Rather than letting him be the last to know, they might as well inform him in advance. Swallowing his saliva, Manny continued, "Kaunitz's uncle is a guy who went missing 10 years ago. He's a conferred knight. We've only just found out about this as well. He's clearly one of the Treja clan's trump cards. This is nothing much. Even a conferred knight would not be able to protect his own nephew so easily. However, he went to the imperial capital 5 years ago, and just 3 months ago, he became one of the 5 deputy commanders of the imperial capital's imperial guard. All of this was achieved with the first prince's help. Based on our understanding, it was because he was unable to leave behind any descendants that the first prince and the Treja clan's clan head developed him into a hidden card. You should know that the position of the commander of the Imperial Guards is quite different to the royal family. Seeing that Fang Xinjian was still not saying a word, Manny seemed to feel that the air was getting heavier and heavier. He coughed and continued, "Kaunitz is already a cripple." He coughed and continued, "Mongol Royal Academy's headmaster Oliver has crippled the tendons in his arms and legs. His 5 attributes will never exceed 10 points, and he can no longer use his waves and mental cultivation method. He's really a cripple. There's not much difference whether he's dead or alive. Moreover, he's been stripped of his knight status and has become a commoner. And the Treja clan's request is very simple. They want to spare Kaunitz's life so that he can continue the Treja clan's lineage. As a price, Kaunitz's uncle, Adri, will betray the first prince. As a deputy commander of the Imperial Guards, he will become one of us, which means he will become one of the second prince's men. As a price, Kaunitz's uncle, Adri, will betray the first prince. As the deputy commander of the Forbidden Army, he will become one of us, which is the second prince's man. Xinjiang, if Adri were to submit to us, you'll know of the benefits to the second prince's control over the imperial capital and to deal a blow to the first prince's momentum. And the price we'll have to pay is just to hand over a cripple in our hands to him. The Treja clan will guarantee that Kaunitz will never leave his home for the rest of his life. Looking at the eerily silent Fang Xinjiang, Manny patted him on the shoulder and said, "Xinjiang, the overall situation is of utmost importance." Fang Xinjiang's brows relaxed and his eyelids drooped. He looked like a 10,000-year-old iceberg. From the very beginning, ever since I was young, I've only wanted to focus on wielding my sword, pursuing the highest realm of sword arts alone. However, the world is unfair. In this world, those who focus wholeheartedly on doing something behind closed doors will not be able to succeed. Connections, conspiracies, the ways of the world. If one's heart is filled with too many distracting thoughts, how can one have the chance to appreciate the scenery at the top? All of them hold positions of authority without doing anything, forming cliques, making it impossible for me to practice my sword arts in peace. This is so frustrating, so frustrating. In that instant, Manny stood up abruptly. Although Fang Xinjiang's words were mixed with a lot of Chinese terms, such as corpses, demons, thoughts, and so on, Manny did not really understand them. He felt as if there was a ferocious beast baring its fangs and claws at him, waiting to devour him. He looked at Fang Xinjiang with a grim expression and said, "Xinjiang, don't be rash. Also, in order to get your forgiveness, they're willing to compensate you with 5,000 gold. This is enough to buy a top-notch level 19 inferior divine weapon." Fang Xinjiang's aura gradually weakened and dissipated. It was as if he had once again become a harmless student. It was as if what Manny had seen earlier was just an illusion. Fang Xinjiang smiled. "Don't worry, I won't act recklessly." Manny nodded, but he still felt a little uneasy. He had already made up his mind to send someone over to keep an eye on Fang Xinjiang for 24 hours a day, so that he would not cause any trouble. After Manny left, Fang Xinjiang let out a cold laugh. Fang Xinjiang had also been an ordinary person in the past. He had once thought of cultivating in silence, becoming stronger, and eventually reaching the top. However, ever since he had been harmed in Demonic City and ended up in a foreign land, he had been transformed by the purple flames. He had lost all emotions, and all that was left in his heart was fury and vengeance. However, his thoughts had become clearer, especially after his mental cultivation method had mutated. His thoughts and his heart had also become increasingly clear. Society's resources were controlled by those in a higher position. Therefore, regardless of which line of work it was, as long as one wanted to stand out and become stronger, they would definitely be recruited by those in a higher position. They would also have to abide by the social rules they had set. While receiving benefits, they would also be oppressed or exploited. This was unavoidable. It did not matter if the rules were dark or bright, kind or cruel. The darkness of the world was like a cage, imprisoning his heart. If he wanted to ask for true peace, true freedom of the mind, then he could only slash it with his sword, slaying all the external demons before him, in exchange for a peace of mind. He slowly stood up, and with a step, he was like a cool breeze blowing out of the villa. Then, accompanied by streams of sword cheese, he took another 3 steps and exited Cursed Royal Academy, heading into Cursed City. Kaunitz was someone he had to kill. However, if he did so, It would mean that he had completely broken off relations with many people, affecting the overall situation. He might even be hunted down by many experts in curse. However, with the value he had displayed, it was not enough to kill him. However, if he were to imprison Fang Xinjian, it would also affect his ability to participate in the regional selection. Therefore, before he killed Kaunitz, he planned to spend the 10,000 gold he had on hand to buy equipment, medicinal ointments, and supplements. The 10,000 gold would be enough to cover his expenses for the next 3 months. At most, after killing Kaunitz, he would hide for 3 months and then participate in the regional selection. As long as one was an official knight, they would have the right to participate in the regional selection. And once one passed the regional selection and became a conferred knight, then killing a piece of trash like Kaunitz would be nothing. The circulation of the mental cultivation method in his mind became increasingly intense, and his proficiency in it increased at a crazy rate. Under the tremendous pressure, he sought another breakthrough. This was especially so since Fang Xinjian had just reached the bottleneck of heaven's perception. He could only feel that the existence of ether particles seemed to be getting increasingly clearer as his mental cultivation method continued to circulate. However, there was still a layer of fog-like thing shrouding his heart, preventing him from truly achieving a breakthrough. He had a feeling that as long as he killed Kaunitz, he would be able to completely resolve this karma in his heart. With his mind at ease, he would be able to truly achieve a breakthrough and reach the realm of heaven's perception, giving him a chance to pursue the second transition. Chapter 187. Coming up to Ferdinand, Fang Xinjian said directly, "I want to spend all my money within a day to buy equipment, medicinal ointments, and all sorts of useful things." Ferdinand was stunned for a moment, but seeing how serious Fang Xinjian was, he did not say much. He merely nodded and said, "All right, come with me." Therefore, Fang Xinjian followed Ferdinand through the streets and alleys of Kurst. After making many turns, they finally came to a sewer. After entering the sewer, they continued to make many turns. After about 5 minutes, a loud commotion finally gushed into Fang Xinjian's ears. Ferdinand smiled and said, "Kurst is the pearl of the great western region, with countless products from the west coast gathered here. However, those who are really rich can only do so. Many of the products are prohibited from being sold by the government, and that's why there's a black market." Fang Xinjian slowly walked past him, controlling the sword cheese that were like a gentle breeze and sweeping out. Countless people in the underground black market shivered slightly, feeling as if the temperature had dropped. The bustling scene of the underground market also appeared in Fang Xinjian's mind. Ferdinand asked, "How is it? What do you want to buy first?" "Weapons. I want a sword," Fang Xinjian said, patting the ordinary metal sword on his belt. He had long wanted a sword, but he had never had the chance to get one. Up until now, a metal sword would shatter if he used just the slightest bit of force. Ferdinand smiled and said, "Come with me." As he walked by himself, Fang Xinjian's mind kept on outlining the scenes he passed by. There were people who practiced martial arts with swords and sabers in their hands, and there were all sorts of stalls in the densely packed alleys. Some of them had many pieces of meat and leather of unknown quality. Some of them were bottles and jars, emitting various colored medicinal ointments and medicine. There were even ferocious beasts that were alive. There was a huge wolf that was 4 to 5 meters long, a black bear that was the size of a tank, and a gorilla with 3 heads that kept on howling at Fang Xinjian who was passing by. All kinds of novel things that he had never seen before kept appearing in front of Fang Xinjian, causing him to be a little surprised. In the past, he had focused on cultivation and did not have much money. This was the first time he had come to such an underground black market. However, Ferdinand was clearly very familiar with this place. After making a few turns, he had already entered an area filled with the sounds of metal striking. Looking at the many smiths by the roadside and the weapons placed casually in the stalls, Ferdinand said in a soft voice, "These stalls are all selling ordinary weapons for non-knight use. I'll bring you to a good place where you can buy the Empire's divine weapon." Fang Xinjian nodded and followed Ferdinand to the entrance of a huge shop. It was a huge stone house that had been forcefully embedded into the wall and had been dug out from the ground. Before they even got close, they could feel a gush of heat gushing toward them, as if they had come to the mouth of a volcano. Upon arriving, they could see rows and rows of weapon racks. Fang Xinjian casually picked up a longsword and could see the cold gleam on it. There were faint patterns on it, and with just a slight glance, there was a sense of sharpness piercing toward the eyes. It was obvious that it was extremely sharp. This longsword seemed to have reached the pinnacle of cold weapon craftsmanship. Although it was not an Empire's divine weapon and did not have a grade, it was still much better than the longsword in Fang Xinjian's hand. Ferdinand led Fang Xinjian in with great familiarity and shouted, "Welcome the guest, welcome the guest. A big client has arrived." A strong man walked out. His upper body was bare and shiny, as if he was the strongest bodybuilder on earth. When he saw Ferdinand, he said impatiently, "It's you again, you rascal. You're just looking and not buying. I don't have the time to entertain you." Ferdinand smiled and said, "Hee, it's not me who wants to buy. It's my friend who wants to buy." Ferdinand pointed to Fang Xinjian behind him and said, "It's a really big customer. There's no need to bring out ordinary goods. I know that you have a few Empire's divine weapons." That strong man's brows twitched and said, "Empire's divine weapons are forbidden items. We don't sell them here." Ferdinand grinned and took out 10 mortgage slips from his pocket. They were all things that Ferdinand would take out for transactions after he had deposited Fang Xinjian's money into the bank. It was a little similar to pen and paper. However, the Empire did not have a unified bank across the entire country. The trustworthiness of these mortgage slips depended entirely on the bank's credit rating. However, it was still much better than Ferdinand and Fang Xinjian moving a chest of money. As for the secret auction of the human skull, due to the need to keep it a secret and the requirement for the goods to be delivered at the same time, the transaction would naturally be settled in cash. Looking at the numbers on the mortgage slips, the boss felt as if his eyes were swaying. He cried out in his heart, "Fat sheep! Big fat sheep!" He immediately changed his expression and went up to Fang Xinjian with a smile, saying, "Sir, what kind of weapon would you like? We have sabers, spears, staffs, armors, and helmets. Just tell me what you want." "I want a sword," Fang Xinjian said. "It must be an Empire's divine weapon, or even an inferior divine weapon." That strong man frowned. "We don't have any inferior divine weapons here. However, we do have 2 level 9 longswords. Come with me to take a look." Therefore, the two of them followed the strong man to the depths of the stone house. They walked up to a secret door and then went in deeper, arriving at a secret room filled with weapons. There were a total of 12 strong men guarding this place. It was clear that these were the best weapons in the shop. That strong man ordered someone to bring out 2 longswords and bring them to Fang Xinjian. He first drew out a blue-sheathed longsword and introduced it proudly. "This sword is called the Fiery Thunderbolt. The body of the sword is forged from 13 types of alloys. Regardless of whether it's toughness, or sharpness, it's second to none among level 9 divine weapons. Moreover, there are prints personally engraved by a master blacksmith and fire paste poured into it. As long as it has slight friction with the air, it'll be able to produce high temperatures and kill enemies." With that, he swung the longsword, and hints of sparks flew out from the longsword's wound. He then picked up the sword sheath and said, "This sword sheath was also forged meticulously. Not only is there a layer of fire insulation, but there's also a large amount of fire paste. Once the fire paste on the longsword is used up, we'll just have to insert it back into the sword sheath, and we'll be able to use it again. Fang Xinjian nodded, looked at the other sword, and said, "Then what about this one?" The strong man put away the fiery thunderbolt and picked up the pitch-black longsword that seemed to be emitting waves of deathly aura. He became even prouder. "This one is even more amazing." As he slowly drew out the longsword, a series of soft buzzing sounds rang out from the sword. Even Ferdinand felt a little irritated when he heard this buzzing sound. Chapter 188. What appeared before Fang Xinjian and Ferdinand was a longsword that was completely black. Its blade was streamlined, but there were many strange holes and prints on it. The muscular boss introduced, "This sword's demoness howl. Putting aside the sword's blade, it's a high-grade Empire's divine weapon that's comparable to the fiery thunderbolt. And the most special thing about it is the 123 wind prints on its body. As long as it swings the sword quickly and slashes through the air, it'll produce a sound similar to the demoness howl, causing the opponent to be frustrated or even infuriated. As the longsword slashed through the air, sobbing sounds could be heard, as if there was a female ghost crying. Hearing this voice, the muscular boss, Ferdinand, and even the 12 men guarding the armory furrowed their brows, feeling vaguely irritated. However, Fang Xinjian was expressionless. His willpower was enough to easily overcome a sound technique of this level. He merely looked at the black longsword and nodded, saying, "How much?" The muscular boss wore an elated expression and said, "Fixed price, 500 gold. Fang Xinjian pouted at Ferdinand and said, "I'll buy it." Taking out the level 9 Empire's divine weapon, the demoness howl, Ferdinand said helplessly, "You should at least offer a price." "I don't have the time." Fang Xinjian shook his head and said, "Is there any medicinal paste or food here that can directly increase one's attributes, or even potential?" Ferdinand grinned and said, "Of course there is, but these things are very expensive. Most of them are not even as good as you training hard on your own. Bring me over to take a look." In front of a shop filled with the smell of medicine, an old lady with white hair and a face full of wrinkles opened her mouth, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. She pointed to the bottle of medicine in her hand and said, "Bones of a wind bird, eyeballs of a mountain eagle, and a secret medicine formed from 56 types of ferocious beasts, spider medicine. It can increase a person's reaction attribute by at most 3 points. It's useless to take it repeatedly?" "Of course it's useless." "How much?" 3,000 gold. Fang Xinjian nodded. "I'll buy it." "Wait a minute." Ferdinand had just opened his mouth when he could only hold his forehead helplessly, handing over the pawned heart to the old lady unwillingly. In a shop that was covered by flowers and trees, making the entire underground tunnel look like a forest, a man wearing a headscarf and holding a puppy in his arms stared at Fang Xinjian in a daze. After hearing his question, he looked at a stalk of herb that was emitting a faint green glow and said, "Heart-linking grass. Each stalk can stimulate potential, but it's poisonous. You can only eat 10 stalks a day at most, and it will increase your potential by 1,000 points." Fang Xinjian asked, "Can the Netherworld Valley's antidote be neutralized?" The adorable girl who was hugging the puppy thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "It should be possible. But even so, eating 100 plants at most won't have any effect because the human body has already adapted and produced antibodies." "How much for 100 stalks?" 1,000 gold. "Give me 100 stalks." Ferdinand let out a deep sigh and took out the 5 mortgage slips, feeling a slight heartache. He felt that each payment was like a stab to his kidney. "Let's go, Ferdinand." Fang Xinjian grabbed the heart-linking grass in his hands and started eating it quickly. He then poured in the antidote that he had brought along with him. Ever since he had been poisoned, he had developed the habit of bringing antidotes with him, as if they were water. Ferdinand said with a pained heart, "These are all hard-earned money. How can you spend it so casually?" Fang Xinjian said, It's not just casually. They're all things that I need. He said to Ferdinand, you must remember that no matter how much money you save up, it'll just be ordinary scrap metal. Money will only have value if you take it out and spend it on something meaningful. Although Ferdinand still felt a heartache after hearing Fang Xinjian's words, he vaguely felt that there was some logic to it. In a shop that looked like a pet shop, there were all sorts of glowing rabbits, huge wolves with 2 heads, white tigers with wings, and many other ferocious beasts. Fang Xinjian looked at the sexy lady boss, who was covered in tattoos and dressed in beast skin, and asked, if I want to level up, which ferocious beast would be the fastest to buy? The lady boss smiled and pointed to a cage with pitch-black fur that looked like steel needles. She said, this is the needle hair technique. If you want to kill things to level up, this is the best choice. 1 gold coin for 100 of them. I'll have as many as you want. This type of rat did not have any value at all. It survived purely by relying on its ability to reproduce, which was many times stronger than ordinary rats. However, it was also because of this that it was cheap and good. It became a type of ferocious beast that countless people would purchase to level up and gain experience. Fang Xinjian nodded as well. Then I'll take this. In a shop that had swords, sabers, armor, medicine, small ferocious beasts, and almost everything else. A short man looked at Fang Xinjian with a smile and asked, Sir, what are you looking for? Fang Xinjian asked, is there anything that can fill one's stomach, replenish one's vital energy and blood, and is easy to carry around? Yes, of course. The short boss walked into the shop and shouted, wait here. Not long later, he came back with a small cloth bag and took out 3 purple pills from it. He said, this was smuggled over from Uranlis with great difficulty. It was made by the mages there. Fang Xinjian picked up a pill the size of a fingernail and asked, what is this? The people there call this magic bean. It's made from the concentrated essence of over 10 types of ferocious beasts. It's said that mages' magic energy has also been added to it. If an ordinary person eats one, they won't need to eat for 10 days. Even for martial arts practitioners like you, if they eat one, it'll be sufficient for an entire day's training. Fang Xinjian naturally did not have enough to eat one a day. However, he still smiled and asked, how much is this? Ferdinand could not hold it in any longer and said, Xinjian, it's not like you're going on an expedition. Why are you buying this? Fang Xinjian did not mind and asked, how much? This is a smuggled product and there aren't many of them. However, seeing that you're so sincere, I'll sell it to you at a lower price. The short boss said, 3 gold for 1. Fang Xinjian nodded, give me 300. Ferdinand cast a resentful glance at Fang Xinjian, but eventually handed over the mortgage under the latter's urging. Just like that, the two of them spent a total of 6 hours, and the 10,000 gold coins that Ferdinand had brought with him were almost all gone. Fang Xinjian finally got to enjoy the feeling of being rich and cultivating. It was extremely convenient. And now, he still had a longsword, Demoness Howl, and 300 magic beans as rations. As for the rest of the money, he had already exchanged them for various items and eaten them on the spot, or killed the needle for rats to level up. He had finally reached level 19, which was the highest level for the first transition. Adding on to the results of his cultivation during this period of time, as well as the fact that his waves had risen by another level after 24 hours of cultivation a few days ago, his attributes had become: Name Fang Xinjian, age 17, occupation Windshadow Sword, divinity level. Level 19, strength 57 plus 5 agility 191 plus 5 reaction, 68 endurance, 50 flexibility, 52. The attributes above come into effect once the Sonido Sword Zephyr Waves is activated due to perfect muscles, plus 5 in strength and agility. 10% of the endurance attribute. Nurturing Sword Techniques 94 sets. Training Sword Techniques 12 sets. Supreme Mistwind Sword Level 30. Radiant Light Sword Technique Level 18. Ether Divine Art Level 1. Genius Swordsmanship, Elementary Survival Instinct, Internal Healing, Internal Training, Sword Specialist, High Agility Motion Vision, Heightened Reflexes, Perfect Muscles, Elementary Berserkness, Unparalleled Sword Intent, 95 out of 100, Potential 11,000 point increase / Day Waves Level 6 Sonido Sword Zephyr. Waves Mental Cultivation Method Level 3 Universal Sword Dominance Lunasolar. With that, Fang Xinjian's abilities increased once again. With 196 points in agility, he could break through 10 times that of supersonic speed. His unparalleled sword intent still needed another 5 sets of sword techniques to reach the maximum level before it would undergo a qualitative change. His Radiant Light Sword technique was only 2 levels away from obtaining another special effect. Therefore, when he returned to the academy, he planned to kill his way to the Treasure Clan after his unparalleled sword intent and Radiant Light Sword technique leveled up. No matter who tried to stop him, he would chop off Kaunitz's head. Chapter 189. Everything was peaceful. Fang Xinjian taught the elite class and the ordinary class martial techniques in the day, and at night, he would cultivate the Radiant Light Sword technique and the other nurturing technique. Just as Manny and the others thought that Fang Xinjian was planning to take the big picture into consideration and not take any action, 6 days passed by quickly. Fang Xinjian's Radiant Light Sword technique had finally reached the maximum level of level 20. The other 4 nurturing techniques had also reached the maximum level, and the unparalleled sword intent required a total of 100 sets of sword techniques at the maximum level. The unparalleled sword intent had finally leveled up after dragging on for so long. Fang Xinjian could not wait to look at the new introduction. Unparalleled sword intent Apex. Able to instantly break through all physical attack. The speed at which one learns sword techniques increases once again. Able to learn with a single glance and familiarize oneself with a single practice. If the same sword technique were to fall into your hands, cultivating it over 10 times would be equivalent to cultivating it over 10 years for others. Other than the flaws in the moves, you also understand the weaknesses of all living things. There is nothing that you cannot slash, nothing that you cannot cut. You can gradually use your sword arts to slash through any weapon, including the Empire's divine weapons, inferior divine weapons, superior divine weapons, and divine remains equipment. You can even slash through light and ether particles. Looking at this scene, Fang Xinjian could not help but be slightly dazed, especially when he saw the final level of slashing through light and ether particles. Wouldn't that mean that even electromagnetic waves could be slashed through? If that was the case, being able to slash through all sorts of waves including visible light, infrared rays, and ultraviolet rays, and even ether particles, then, no matter how strong one's reduced force field was, one would be able to slash through it? Even attacks such as high temperature, low temperature, lightning, and gravity waves could be slashed through? Wasn't this the single sword technique? What kind of level would this be? It was a pity that he was only at the level of slashing through Empire's divine weapons. He still needed to continue cultivating his sword arts to reach a higher level. But what kind of sword arts realm would he need to reach in order to be able to slash at a deeper level? There was no explanation for this, and Fang Xinjian could only slowly explore it himself. The Radiant Light Sword technique had reached the maximum level of level 20, and it also had an additional special effect. It could refract sunlight and moonlight, increasing the brightness of the light. Originally, the Radiant Light Sword technique was already like a flash grenade. Now that it could be enhanced by sunlight and moonlight, it was unknown how bright it would be. Fang Xinjian was deep in thought. Right now, he could not see, so if they were to fight, he would use the Radiant Light Sword technique first, then charge up and use the supreme Mistwind sword and the high-frequency effulgence weapon to break through the opponent's defense, before finally using the ether sword ripples to kill the opponent. The radiant light sword technique, supreme Mistwind sword, high-frequency effulgence weapon, ether sword ripples. When these four techniques were used together, they would produce a tremendous destructive prowess. Therefore, after completing his preparations, Fang Xinjian held onto the Banshee's Howl and Silver Fox that very night, walking slowly towards Treja's residence. At the same time, in a secret room in the Treja clan, the white-haired Treja clan's clan head sat on a chair, his face as dark as charcoal. Next to him, the pale-faced Kaunitz lay on the bed, his body still wrapped in bandages. He lifted his head and looked at the sky, his eyes filled with confusion and terror. Just then, a servant walked in, looked at the Treja clan's clan head, and said, "Sir, the people we sent to keep an eye on him have yet to find him. It's true that Fang Xinjian has disappeared. He's not in the academy." It turned out that the Treja clan's clan head was worried that Fang Xinjian would seek revenge, so he had sent people to keep an eye on Fang Xinjian's villa. Not in the academy? If not in the academy, then where is he? The Treja clan's clan head frowned, his emotions fluctuating slightly. However, he seemed to have noticed this as well. He controlled himself and said coldly, "He's just a blind man. I don't believe that he can hide anywhere else. Send everyone out to search for him. Even if you have to flip the entire cursed city upside down, you must find him." Hearing Fang Xinjian's name, Kaunitz suddenly trembled and shouted, "Fang Xinjian? What's wrong with him? Is he here to kill me?" How could the current Kaunitz be compared to the high-spirited Kaunitz from 2 months ago? 2 months ago, he was still extremely talented, his sword arts far surpassing those of his age. He had even signed the first prince's devil's note, possessed the bloodline of a human and a dragon, and controlled the divine flames of the earth's core. With just a tap of his finger, all first transition knights would have to avoid him. His talent, power, and background had brought him endless confidence. However, now that his talent was useless, and a large portion of the tendons in his arms and legs had been severed, and his attributes had dropped below 10 points, terror could not help but descend upon him. It was just like how a person who had 1 billion would gradually become arrogant and domineering. If a person were to go bankrupt, he would not be able to maintain his pride for long. After Kaunitz lost everything, and after a month of torture, he was only left with pain, hatred, despair, and an endless fear of death. Fang Xinjian. That damned Fang Xinjian. He was like an angry patient, throwing out the pillows and blankets on his bed in a fit of rage. With a face filled with fury and fear, he said to the Treja clan's head, "Father, you must stop him. This be **starred. He's capable of doing anything. Where's Jackson? Where's Cursed City Lord? Didn't they guarantee that Fang Xinjian would not come to kill me? Liars, all liars. Enough." The Treja clan's clan head was disturbed by the other party and could not help but glare at Kaunitz, saying, "Shut up. Look at yourself now. Fang Xinjian has only gone missing, but it doesn't mean that he will come to kill you. Moreover, even if he does, I'll protect you. What are you afraid of? Haha, you're finding me a burden now because I've become a cripple? So, in your eyes, I'm just a machine that gives birth. Ha 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 ha, all of you are looking down on me. All of you are letting me down. All of you will regret this. All of you will regret this." Looking at Kaunitz's deranged state, a hint of pain and hatred flashed in the Treja clan's head's eyes. Kaunitz was the son he had gotten in his old age, his only son. He had doted on this son so much, and had placed so much hope on him. Now that he saw Kaunitz in such a state, how could he not be upset? How could he not be in agony? He hated Fang Xinjian for constantly provoking Kaunitz, hated the first prince for burning the bridge after crossing it, and hated Oliver for torturing Kaunitz in prison, turning him into a cripple. Unable to bear to see his son in such a state, He walked out and stood outside, waiting for news. Outside the door, ever since he had received the news that Fang Xinjian had gone missing, he had called for a total of 7 people in the clan, including Xiao Yi and Zhou Yong, who had been studying in the academy. Looking at the 7 knights before him, he felt much more at ease. Although Fang Xinjian might not really come, it's better than being unprepared. Kaunitz is the hope of our clan's bloodline, and we mustn't lose him. An hour passed. 3 hours passed. 6 hours passed. Fang Xinjian seemed to have disappeared like a wisp of smoke. No matter how much the Treja clan's influence tried to find out or search, they could not find any trace of Fang Xinjian. It was as if he had completely disappeared. A bunch of trash. You can't even find a blind man. What use are you guys? The Treja clan's head said coldly, "This won't do. We can't let this go on. Although he's blind, it's only his head-on battle prowess that's weakened. He might not be able to pass the regional selection, and he might not be able to attack from afar, but his speed is still there. If he were to sneak into the manor and launch a sneak attack on us with his unparalleled speed, even I might not be able to fend off his sneak attack. Even if we kill him afterward, what's the use? There's no need to risk our lives against such a person. We've already given the second prince our conditions." The Treja clan's head said, "Quick, go get Cursed City Lord and Headmaster Jackson. Tell them to capture Fang Xinjian as soon as possible. Tell them that they must fulfill the conditions we agreed upon when we made the deal back then." After giving these instructions, he looked at the 7 knights beside him, as well as the armor they were wearing. He felt even more at ease. He's already blind, and he hasn't attained heaven's perception. How could he possibly defeat the 8 of us knights head-on? It's impossible for him to attack us head-on. Thinking of this, the Treja clan's head shook his head. In comparison, we still have to be careful of his assassination. From now on, we mustn't let anyone get close to Kaunitz. Then we'll just have to wait for Jackson and the others to capture Fang Xinjian. However, suddenly, cries of shock, the sounds of weapons dropping, bodies falling, buildings collapsing, and all sorts of other sounds rang out from outside the courtyard. All the sounds were linked together, as if they had come out at the same time. This showed how fast the other party's attack was. The Treja clan's head gulped, feeling that the sounds were getting closer and closer. Earlier, they had been several hundred meters away, but now they seemed to be several tens of meters away. When he tried to listen carefully, he realized that it was all quiet, and he could not hear anything at all. The entire Treja clan's courtyard was silent, as if everyone had lost the ability to speak within the span of 10 or so breaths. This was Fang Xinjian openly attacking them head-on. Chapter 190. Fang Xinjian's footsteps landed lightly on the bluestone slabs in front of the door. A slight breeze followed him, encompassing the space within a radius of 100 meters. Even though he was blind, he could still clearly sense the situation within a radius of 100 meters. The scene he had constructed in his mind allowed him to clearly see hundreds or even thousands of apprentices falling to the ground behind him. Some were moaning, some were screaming, and some had even fainted. All of them had been knocked down within a short half a minute. Each of them had been knocked down with a single move, but they had not even been able to see clearly what had knocked them down. Fang Xinjian could also sense that there were 8 powerful knights waiting for him behind the door. Each of their hearts was as powerful as an electric motor, and their fresh blood flowed through their bodies like a great river, bringing them great power and speed. Fang Xinjian could hear their heartbeats and breathing. The wind flowed past their bodies, allowing him to accurately sense their positions, figures, and even the weapons on their waists, backs, and hands. If he were to engage in a battle with these 8 people, once they all started moving at high speed, or even accelerating beyond the speed of sound, it would not be easy for Fang Xinjian to deal with them. Therefore, he did not plan on giving them a chance to speak or attack. The next moment, boundaries negation was activated. Right now, Fang Shijian's speed had reached 10 times that of sound. This was a terrifying speed. If he were to run at full speed, he would be able to cover 3 to 4 kilometers in a second. 1 second was sufficient for him to run 8 rounds around the 400-meter field. In 10 seconds, he would be able to go from Kurst's east gate to the west gate. 100 seconds was sufficient for him to run from Shanghai to Nanjing. What kind of terrifying speed did this represent? Even most conferred knights below level 25 would not be able to reach such a speed. Therefore, in this 1 second, it was sufficient for him to defeat 8 knights. Fang Xinjian, who was traveling at 10 times the speed of sound, felt as if time had slowed down around him. The air was as viscous as glue. He lifted one hand and retreated toward the door in front of him. He felt the resistance getting stronger and stronger. At the same time, a burning sensation came from his hand. It was the heat caused by the friction between the air, and his entire palm turned red. Then, he felt a gentle push on the door, and the entire door suddenly flew up. Then, like a movie playing in slow motion, it flew inch by inch towards the courtyard. Taking a step forward, Fang Shijian arrived at the courtyard. The 8 knights remained motionless, their expressions remained unchanged. The entire space was silent, because no sound could travel at all. Under the high-speed friction with the air, his body kept on being heated up, and the surrounding air was also heating up rapidly. He felt as if he was strolling leisurely up to a middle-aged knight and punching him lightly in the stomach. The middle-aged knight, who had been hit, was suddenly sent flying. Then, in midair, he slowly slammed into the wall inch by inch. His expression did not change in the slightest, remaining the same as it had been a second ago. Then, Fang Shijian appeared before Xiao Yi and kicked him in the chin. His teeth, blood, and saliva splattered out inch by inch in the air, and Xiao Yi was also sent flying in slow motion. Then it was the next night. All 8 knights, including the Treja clan's clan head, were sent flying in slow motion by Fang Xinjian. The next moment, he stopped using boundaries negation, and at this moment, only 1 second had passed. Boom 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 boom. Bang 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 bang. In the instant that time seemed to have returned to normal, the series of sonic booms caused by Fang Xinjian's actions at 10 times the speed of sound were like 100 bombs exploding in the courtyard at the same time. Strong gales, air currents, and white fog spread out crazily. The 8 knights let out agonizing cries as they were sent flying. Like 8 bulldozers, each of them smashed through 5 to 6 walls before finally falling into a pile of rubble. The Treja clan's clan head stood up with great difficulty, trembling as he stared in Fang Xinjian's direction. Large areas of white fog surrounded Fang Xinjian, spurting out incessantly like water vapor. That was the air friction at 10 times the speed of sound, causing Fang Xinjian's body to be heated up incessantly, as if he was a meteorite that had broken through the atmosphere. Fang Xinjian walked out from the white fog step by step, his entire body glowing with a faint red light. There was still a large amount of perspiration and white fog seeping out from his skin, and there were even some faint signs of burns. As expected, under high-speed movements, the requirement for one's body's toughness is getting higher and higher. Even if I have boundaries negation as my foundation and am free from the restrictions of the other attributes, just the high temperature from the air friction alone would be enough to cook me if I were to continue moving at the highest speed. Knights were humans as well. As long as they had not gone through the second transition and had not stepped into the divine level, they would still be made of flesh and blood, and would have unavoidable flaws. At the same time, in Kaunitz's room, he shouted out uneasily, "Father? Father, are you there? What's going on? Why are there explosions? Is Fang Xinjian here?" His voice was filled with helplessness and fear, as if he was a young puppy crying out alone in the dark. Hearing his son's voice, the Treja clan's clan head looked in Fang Xinjian's direction. The Treja clan's clan head looked at Fang Xinjian, who seemed to be burning up, and then at the manor, which was in a state of devastation, as if it had been plowed by a bomber plane. He clenched his teeth and said, "Fang Xinjian, must you be so ruthless? Kaunitz is already a cripple. Why do you have to make things difficult for him? The reason why I'm killing him has nothing to do with whether he's a cripple or not. It's because I want to kill him." Fang Xinjian tilted his head and looked in the direction of Kaunitz's room, his face brimming with killing intent. The Treja clan's clan head shouted, "Fang Xinjian, if you kill Kaunitz, you'll be destroying the entire Treja clan's lineage. If you want to kill, then kill my entire clan, all of my clansmen and 3,000 servants." How could Fang Xinjian possibly care about him? For someone with a will as strong as steel, once he wanted to kill someone, then even if an army of thousands of men and horses, the world overturned, or even rivers of blood flowed, they would not be able to change his mind in the slightest. Watching him walk towards the room, the Treja clan's clan head bellowed, "Fang Xinjian, if you kill Kaunitz, my younger brother will definitely not side with the second prince. From then on, the first prince will have the upper hand. In the future, the people in the world will be plunged into misery and suffering. Won't you blame yourself? Don't worry. Such a thing won't happen. Because within 4 years, I'll definitely kill the first prince. If you don't wish for your younger brother to be killed by me in the future, then advise him not to side with the first prince. Otherwise, when I kill people in the future, I won't care if it's because I have no other choice." Chapter 191. Just as Fang Xinjian was talking and walking towards Kaunitz's room, Headmaster Jackson finally could not take it anymore and appeared at the main door. "Enough, Xinjian. Do you really want to make a big deal out of this?" Jackson looked at everything with an indifferent expression, but he was secretly astonished at the speed of Fang Xinjian's growth. Even with the naked eye, I was unable to see the kill in that 1 second. Right now, if Fang Xinjian did not enter my reduced force field, I probably would not be able to see his movements clearly. 10 times that of supersonic speed was a speed that could no longer be seen by the naked eye. Even if Jackson was at second transition level 26, he would not be able to break through such physical limitations. However, if it was within the reduced force field, then he would be able to see Fang Xinjian's movements clearly. It was because no matter how fast Fang Xinjian's speed was, it would be impossible for him to be faster than the transmission speed of ether particles. That was similar to electromagnetic waves, transmitting at the speed of light. Moreover, Headmaster Jackson's second transition job, the Tyrant Fist of the Azure Skies, had a reduced force field domain that spanned 300 meters. This meant that within 300 meters, all phenomena were clearly visible to him. Therefore, the moment he stepped through the door, he already had a good grasp of the situation within 300 meters around him. Therefore, in the next moment, his countenance changed and he dashed out. Accompanied by a long whistle and shock waves, he dashed into Kaunitz's room. Kaunitz, who had been lying on the bed, had long since disappeared. There was only a large hole in the middle of the bedroom. Clearly, the weakened Kaunitz had been abducted. Treja clan's clan head looked at Headmaster Jackson's state and panicked, stumbling over. When he saw the scene in the room, he was taken aback. "What's going on? Where did Kaunitz go? Can't be that you guys really thought that I didn't do anything while I was missing, right?" When Fang Xinjian saw the two of them looking over, he took a step and instantly retreated over 300 meters away. This was outside of Jackson's reduced force field. His eyelids drooped as he held the Banshee's howl in one hand. He was like a dancer in the night, as if he could disappear from your sight at any moment. Jackson knew that this was because Fang Xinjian's speed and movement technique had reached the limit. Even before he moved, his will had already moved, which was why he gave others the feeling that he was moving but not moving, as if he could disappear at any time. But what he cared about was not this, but what Fang Xinjian had just said. This meant that the big hole under Kaunitz's room was dug by Fang Xinjian. It turned out that Fang Xinjian had long since thought that Jackson and the others would protect Kaunitz. If they were to openly protect him, he would dash out from the tunnel and release several hundred streams of ether sword ripples at one go, using the ether sword ripples that were 10 times that of supersonic speed to slash Kaunitz into meat paste. If this were to happen, the conflict between him and the second prince would naturally intensify, and he would have to flee at full speed. If it was another situation where none of the conferred knights went to protect Kaunitz due to their statuses, then he would step out to attract everyone's attention. He would then get Robert and Anthony to dash into the room through the tunnel and kidnap Kaunitz in one go. With this, he would not be able to kill Kaunitz in front of everyone. Even if they knew that Kaunitz was doomed, the conflict would not erupt immediately. This was the best situation for Fang Xinjian. Otherwise, if he were to kill Kaunitz in front of everyone, he would end up forming a huge feud with all the conferred knights. Although Fang Xinjian had a strong murderous nature, he was not a fool. If he were to be bold but not astute, unable to even differentiate between foolishness and bravery, how would he have been able to complete the first transition, comprehend ether particles, and cultivate over 100 sets of sword techniques? Although Jackson was not able to completely guess Fang Xinjian's method, he had already guessed most of it. He looked at the big hole under his feet and said, "To be able to silently dig out such a big hole within a few hours. Xinjian, it seems that your sword arts have improved by leaps and bounds again." Fang Xinjian did not say a word. With a level 9 divine weapon like the Demoness Howl in his hands and the augmentation from the unparalleled sword intent, which allowed him to slash through the Empire's divine weapons, it was too easy for him to cut through the ground and silently dig out a tunnel within a few hours. However, Jackson continued, "Even so, the tunnel you've dug is definitely not long. If I were to dash out at my speed, I should still be able to find Kaunitz, right?" Fang Xinjian smiled. "If Headmaster leaves, then I can only go on a killing spree and kill all 8 of the Treasure Clan's knights." Jackson's eyes narrowed, as if he wanted to know if what Fang Xinjian had said was true or not. At the same time, he began to calculate in his heart. If what Fang Xinjian said was true, then the 8 knights being killed would have an extremely negative impact. Since when had so many knights died in such a short period of time, when there was no war? Not only would the deputy commander Adri have to side with the first prince, even the king would be dissatisfied with the situation here, and might even doubt the governor's and the second prince's ability to control the situation. And if it was just Kaunitz who had gone missing, it would just be a commoner who had gone missing. In comparison, it would be much easier than the death of 8 knights. However, the problem was whether Fang Xinjian would dare to do so. Of course, there was another way to resolve this. Jackson's body trembled slightly, and at the next moment, the air exploded. Ripples that could be seen by the naked eye spread out from his body. "Then I'll first subdue you, then look for Kaunitz." At the next moment, a loud bang rang out. No one had seen when Jackson had dashed out 100 meters away, but Fang Xinjian had been sent flying, spitting out a large mouthful of blood. However, the 0.1 second between the punches had given Fang Xinjian enough time to react. Boundaries negation activated. Radiant Light Sword Technique. At 10 times that of supersonic speed, the Demoness Howl in Fang Xinjian's hands cut through the air, releasing a sound that could drive one crazy. At the same time, the Radiant Light Sword Technique was activated at full power. Under the full activation of the level 20 Radiant Light Sword Technique, Fang Xinjian had turned into a man of light. White light shot out from him, making him look like a small sun that had fallen into the ground. Almost half of the people in Cursed could see the white light shooting up into the sky. It was as if the entire Treasure clan had been transformed from night to day. The sudden stimulation from the white light caused the Treasure clan's clan head and the other knights, who were looking in Fang Xinjian's direction to let out agonizing cries, covering their eyes as they retreated. They had been temporarily blinded. Although Headmaster Jackson was at second transition level 26, he was still unable to break free from the limitations of his mortal body. He could not help but close his eyes, tears flowing out from the corners of his eyes. However, even if he did not rely on his naked eyes, he could still sense everything within a radius of 300 meters with his heaven's perception. Of course, this included light. 300 meters away, he dashed out toward the ball of light. However, he realized that although Fang Xinjian could not see him, he had already dashed out the moment Fang Xinjian activated the Radiant Light Sword technique. With Fang Xinjian's boundaries negation maintaining a speed of 10 times that of supersonic speed, Jackson was unable to catch up to him within 300 meters. The distance between them was even increasing bit by bit. In the short span of over 10 seconds, the two of them, one fleeing and the other chasing, their surroundings changing rapidly until they arrived in the wilderness, which was over 50 kilometers away. Along the way, countless people were temporarily blinded by the piercing white light. There were also many who were enraged by the sound of the demoness howl, only calming down after over 10 minutes. After chasing for over 50 kilometers, Jackson saw that Fang Xinjian was getting further and further away. Finally, he threw out a punch. However, as his opponent was already over 300 meters away, the force of his punch was unable to hit him directly. Amidst a huge explosion in the air, Fang Xinjian was sent flying once again. At the same time, he made use of the force of the explosion to increase his speed once again, dashing into the forest. Just as he entered the forest, the white light was extinguished, completely disappearing from Jackson's senses. Chapter 192. Absolute light brought with it absolute darkness. Faced with Fang Xinjian's level 20 Radiant Light Sword technique, even Jackson could forget about opening his eyes. His eyes were being harassed by the Radiant Light Sword technique, and his ears were being attacked by the demoness howl. Both his sight and hearing were no longer able to capture Fang Xinjian's movements. He could only rely on his heaven's perception to sense and battle, and this made him feel slightly unaccustomed. It was precisely this slight unfamiliarity, and the fact that Fang Xinjian had already gotten used to living and battling in the dark. This slight difference allowed Fang Xinjian to escape for over 10 seconds, escaping tens of kilometers away. Despite this, the outcome of the battle was still unknown. However, Jackson stopped and looked quietly in the direction where Fang Xinjian had disappeared. He looked at his hands and sighed, "My old friend, if this is the case, you won't blame me when you come back, right?" In the shadows, Fang Xinjian spat out a mouthful of blood. Even though Jackson had not gone all out, the attack that had brushed past his body had still caused him to suffer internal injuries. However, with internal healing, internal training, and his elementary berserkness physique, his injuries started to heal bit by bit very quickly. He paused for a moment. Although he had not fully recovered, it did not affect his movements. He then headed for the place they had agreed on. Like a cool breeze brushing past the night sky, Fang Xinjian quickly followed cursed alleys and arrived at an underground sewer. He had only gotten this idea after seeing the black market the other time. In the pitch-black sewer, Robert and Anthony were waiting anxiously. Next to them was Kaunitz, who was tied up like a dumpling. Kaunitz's face was pale and filled with fear. The fear of death was like a hand grabbing onto his heart, causing his expression to turn increasingly grim. When he saw Fang Xinjian appear before him, he struggled intensely, and the flesh on his face trembled incessantly. It was as if he had seen a ghost from the legends. Fang Xinjian did not look at Kaunitz for long. Through his senses and hearing, he could tell that Robert and Anthony were both very nervous, even a little afraid. It was obvious that they were feeling a sense of fear and unease towards the future after what they had done today. Fang Xinjian knew that if he didn't do anything, these two people might cause trouble. Sensing Kaunitz's condition, Fang Xinjian's heart suddenly surged with a kind of desire. It was a secret that had been suppressed in his heart for a long time, resulting in a kind of pressure. It was also a shackle to his soul and a shadow in his consciousness. Fang Xinjian suddenly felt that if he could remove this layer of pressure, his mind would be freer. Today was a good opportunity. He suddenly smiled and said, "Kaunitz, do you know why you lost?" Kaunitz kept struggling and whimpering, but his mouth was gagged and he couldn't say anything. Fang Xinjian thought nothing of it. He suddenly took a step back and started to perform a set of sword techniques. It was the Treja clan's descent of holy light. After performing this set of sword techniques, he performed the Silver Moon Prayer sword technique. After that, he continued to perform the same set of sword technique. After performing all of the Treja clan's sword techniques, Fang Xinjian then went on to perform over 30 sets of sword techniques from the other clans and sections. His performance speed was very fast, and he would usually only show the best few moves of a set of sword technique. At the start, Kaunitz continued to struggle, completely ignoring Fang Xinjian's sword technique. However, slowly, his eyes became very round, as if he was looking at the sun rising from the west. He looked at Fang Xinjian, his eyes filled with disbelief. Although Robert and Anthony did not cultivate sword arts, they could understand what Fang Xinjian had just done. He had actually learned over 30 sets of sword techniques by himself? How was this possible? Looking at the trio's astonished expressions, Fang Xinjian said calmly, "Do you understand now, Kaunitz? There's only one reason why you've failed. You've found the wrong opponent. My talent in sword arts is the best in the world. It's not just that I've learned all of Treja's sword techniques. In this world, no matter what sword technique or move it is, as long as it's placed before me, I'll be able to pick it up and master it. It's not just you. In less than a year or two, I'll completely surpass the first prince, chop off his head, and let him accompany you." Just as Fang Xinjian said these words, Kaunitz's countenance turned ashen, his eyes filled with unwillingness, despair, and regret. Why? Why is there someone like Fang Xinjian in this world? Why is there someone like you in this world? Of course, Fang Xinjian was not interested in listening to his inner monologue, nor did he want to take off the cloth to listen to his long-winded ramblings. He just pierced through Kaunitz's heart and body. He sensed Anthony and Robert, who were next to him, and discovered that their heartbeats and blood flow had slowed down. The two of them were no longer as afraid and nervous as before. Instead, they looked at Fang Xinjian with slight agitation and asked, "Xinjian, is what you said earlier true? Your talent is that amazing? But how is this possible? There's never been such a person in this world before." "Now there is," Fang Xinjian said. "When you guys go back later, just pretend that nothing has happened." After revealing a portion of his talent and appeasing Anthony and Robert, Fang Xinjian said, "All right, I'll be leaving." After revealing his talent and then killing Kaunitz with a single sword attack, Fang Xinjian felt a sense of relief in his chest. One was that a secret that he had kept in his heart for a long time had been revealed, dispelling the shadow that had been shrouding his heart for a very long time. The other was that Kaunitz, who had been in a tangle with him for almost a year, had finally been killed by him easily. A sense of relief and tranquility welled up in his heart. He could feel that his mental cultivation method was starting to achieve a breakthrough. He let out a deep breath, as if he had exhaled all the troubles in his heart. Mental cultivation method, Universal Sword Dominance Lunisolar, had achieved a breakthrough, rising from level 3 to level 4. The ether sword ripples had also increased from 1.5 times his strength to 2 times his strength. As his mental cultivation method started to achieve a breakthrough, there seemed to be many indistinct things gushing toward him in the air, as if they would gush into his brain at any moment. Through the continuous exchange of information regarding heaven's perception with Manny, through the experience of a level 25 conferred knight's skull, through today's revelation of his secret to release his body and mind, and through killing Kaunitz, he had fulfilled another wish. Relying on his unrivaled talent and determination, Fang Xinjian had finally obtained a hint of inspiration regarding heaven's perception. He could sense that as long as he continued to polish his spirit, he would truly be able to step into this realm and start to advance in the direction of transcending mortality and entering sainthood. His voice also seemed to become ethereal, slowly entering Anthony's and Robert's ears. The matter in Cursed has come to an end. I've already obtained the true opportunity to attain heaven's perception. Now I'm going to stay far away from people and society. I'm going to polish my spirit bit by bit in absolute peace. I'll be back before the regional selection. By then, I'll definitely have attained heaven's perception. You guys stay in Cursed and don't do anything unnecessary. As for the tuition fees for the classes, help me arrange for a refund. By the time he said the last two words, Fang Xinjian's voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Before Anthony and Robert, Fang Xinjian's silhouette slowly dissipated, eventually disappearing. Fang Xinjian's departure was like a stone sinking into the ocean. There was no more news from Cursed, and they were completely immersed in various comprehensions. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.